Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the work session of the Las Cruces City Council. Today is Monday, February 28th, 2022. It's approximately 1 p.m. Before we begin, if you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so Jennifer Martinez is going to introduce our Pets of the Week.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I am Jennifer Martinez with the City's Communications Office. And today I have a cat and dog of the week to introduce you to. I will begin with our cat of the week, Freya. Freya is a 7-month-old female short hair. She is vocal and lets you know when she's around because she loves to meow for her attention, for your attention. She loves to get pet and cuddle and is almost always purring. She's a very happy girl who is looking for a forever home and hopes it may be your home. And then next we have our dog of the week. Rose is a 3-year-old female who has spent too much time at the shelter. She is patiently waiting for her forever home. She loves attention from caregivers, but hopes to find a family to play and spend her life with. If you can give Rose or Freya a home, please contact the Animal Services Center to make an appointment to visit with either of these girls. The number is 3820018. And also remember, you can visit with some of the shelter's pets this weekend at PetSmart on Saturday from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. The address is 2200 East Loman Avenue. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. And Dr. Paredes is going to give us our jobs of the week.
I believe we have, oh, there you are.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. For this week's Jobs of the Week, the City of Las Cruces is hiring a Capital Improvement Program Analyst, and this position is paying between $26.92 to $38.38, depending, of course, on the experience, and this closes on the 14th of March of 2022. We're also hiring a van driver loader, and this is with Max Meats, and this is paying $14 an hour, and this is a temporary position that will be closing on the 24th of March of 2022. There's also a position available for El Paso Electric. This is a rep customer service, and this is paying between $15.46 an hour, and it depends on the experience as well, and closes on March 24th of 2022. There's also a position available for culinary chef. This is with the Sonoran Fair Culinary. This position is paying $20 an hour, and it will be closing on March 19 of 2022. Finally, an entry-level field technician, and this is an occupation electrical electronic engineering technicians with Layson. The salary for this was not disclosed, and the position will be closing the 23rd of March of 2022. As always, for a full list of jobs, internships, volunteer opportunities, visit employinm.com or governmentjobs.com/careers/Las Cruces. The contact information with our friends at the New Mexico Workforce Connections is at 226 South Alameda Boulevard, and the phone number is 524-6250. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Dr. Paredes. Okay, next we're going to have is the COVID-19 refugee update. So Assistant City Manager Eric Enriquez will be presenting.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Eric Enriquez, Assistant City Manager, to present the COVID-19 update. Happy to say that things are looking real good in Donaian County and the city of Las Cruces, state of New Mexico, everywhere as far as COVID goes. The numbers have gone down as far as positive case counts. Last week, an average of less than 100 per day, so very, very good. That coincided with our hospitals as well. Hospitals are doing very well, seeing a decrease in new patients, and also starting to see the decrease in ICU beds and COVID patients as well. So things are looking real good for our local hospitals. Donaian County vaccination progress. The state is now doing weekly data compilation of the data on a weekly basis, so it won't take place till tomorrow, which now is every Tuesday they'll be doing that due to the decrease in vaccinations and then just showing minimal results. What I can tell you is we're still at 95% for adults in Donaian County with a single dose, and 80% with those with 2 doses, and those boosted, we're close to 50% now. As far as vaccination news goes, the FEMA bus will be here on March 10th and 13th, scheduled at Young Park, and the New Mexico Department of Health continues to offer vaccinations at their clinics, but really turning it over now to pharmacies and local providers. Testing news, we still have a lot of test kits available for the home test kits, and we've publicized, and you can go to Find a Test, newmexico.org, to find the sites here locally and in our county. Moving forward, even though we know there's a lot of unknowns still, the public health officials across the U.S. are identifying some of the following as the future related to COVID-19, turning over the routine testing and vaccinations to private healthcare providers and pharmacies, create and improve new PPE and medical equipment, refine plans for vaccinations for pods should they need, or should mass vaccination in the event that we have another strain or virus that take place. With that kind of news, Mayor, I'm just here to tell you that this will be the last weekly update for us. So in the meantime, hopefully it doesn't have to come back up, but it will as needed. And any asylum, there's nothing to report at this time. Things are looking pretty steady and looking good. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Eric. We appreciate that. Okay, so we have 2 items on the agenda. First one being the natural gas rate review, and Delilah Walsh will lead that off. And so I know there's a few people here who would like to speak. So typically how we do it is we let staff make the presentation, have council ask any questions of staff. After they're done, then I'll open it up to, I believe there's 3 speakers, and I know Senator Hamlin is here, and I believe there's a couple others that may wish to speak, and then you can take questions from council, and then we'll open it up to everyone, okay? So, Delilah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, councilors. Delilah Walsh. I am the director of your Utilities Department. Today, we're here to discuss the rate review and recommendations necessary to operate and maintain the safe and reliable natural gas system we provide today. As you know, it takes scores of men and women with complex and specialized skills to make sure that we are not only operational, but highly effective in our service delivery to our citizens and ratepayers. Though the utility is an enterprise fund, the council is ultimately responsible for providing these utility services, and rate setting is part of those responsibilities. So what is our natural gas rate review? Essentially, we're determining that we have sufficient revenue available to maintain and operate our current natural gas system. And what I mean by that is this rate review is not speculative toward growth or any other issues that may happen in the future. The rate review only includes expenses necessary to maintain the system as it exists today. And actually, it's as it existed during the test year, because today we all know that there are financial challenges and inflation as we go through the years. Something that we've included in this particular rate review is the addition of a decarbonization rider. And that's a portion of a rate that'll be dedicated to these activities, which is evaluating and implementing energy efficiency measures for residential structures. We are identifying priority areas that are older parts and low-income parts of the city where efficiency measures will actually decrease consumption of any energy source. And we've also started partnering with El Paso Electric to upgrade gas and electric appliances to high-efficiency appliances, thus decreasing the amount of energy consumed. And the reason I mention that is because when it comes to equity and making sure that we're addressing the income demands within our community, efficiency is where we're going to find those savings. So in other words, It doesn't matter, well, it does matter, but whatever form of energy that's being delivered to a home, a business, anywhere else, the way we're going to save money is by decreasing consumption. And that's with anything. If you buy less plastics, you decrease consumption, you help the environment. If you use less energy, that decline in consumption is what helps save money. Also with the decarbonization rider, it helps us as the utility to put in the first steps towards energy transition. As we all know, the nation, the state, and even locally, we're all very committed to decreasing our reliance on fossil fuels. That's something that the utility is responsible for also, and this decarbonization rider helps us get to those end goals. On that note, I want to share with you that we do have a climate action plan that the City Council has passed. It sets goals for the city to lower our greenhouse gas emissions by 19% by 2030 and 73% by 2050. And, you know, I would like to commend the community as a whole. As you know, councilors, in our climate action plan, it does state that Las Cruces is one of the, if not the lowest emitting community in our region for a population our size. So we're already a low emissions area, very much thanks to the fact that El Paso does not burn coal in order to generate electricity. But with that, our council has also passed a very aggressive plan to reduce those emissions even more. And so we're very much committed to that and part of that. With the 2030 and 2050 goals, I will tell you on behalf of the utility, and this is just kudos that I'd like to share with my staff, that for a department, and I'm not talking about the end users, the residents, but as an operational department, we've already lowered our own departmental emissions by 12% based on some of the objectives and projects that we've implemented at the utility. So in addition to doing that, we also yielded operational savings and reduced the amount of emissions that our department was generating. Part of that climate action plan was a objective to create an energy transition plan. The council reiterated that commitment in Resolution 153 last year, calling out for the utility to create an energy transition plan to transition and decarbonize our current use of natural gas. So that is a 30-year plan. That is not included with this rate review. I just want to reiterate, the rate review includes operation of our system as it exists today. Whatever happens with the energy transition plan, I wish I knew what the solutions were because I would invest in those personally, but we don't know what those answers are going to look like. How we address equity in our community, how we address the assets that we have in place, how we address the use of natural gas, or even the delivery systems. There's a lot of questions that'll be answered in that decarbonization plan, but that is not considered in this rate review because what we're concerned about now is how do we operate the system as it exists today safely and efficiently. And so that is something we're working toward in the utility, but it's not included with this process. So obviously I'm here today to ask you for an increase in rates. We haven't increased our rates in over 10 years. As you know, things go up in price. If you look at inflation alone over the last 11 years, it's over 25% inflation just in cost of goods for the entire United States. So we do have to address that increased demand and expense cost. The way rate reviews work is we only address the system as it exists and known and measurable increases. So the first one is obviously salary and benefits. We have the salary and benefit increases mandated by the City of Las Cruces. So I very much appreciate the fact that we're not speculating toward more employees, we're not speculating at different salary expenses. We're taking what we know to exist, which is within the City of Las Cruces pay policy. So this rate review, even though we did this with the FY21 test year, I want you to know it's already not sufficient because we're going into FY23 with increased salaries and benefits. Thank you very much to the council and to the city manager. I very much as an employee and as a department head appreciate your efforts to push our salaries to a competitive level and make sure our employees have that fair and competitive wage. But to do that, we also have to recover it from our rates. Unfortunately, those costs are not included with this assumption because our test year was in 2021. This increase in rates, what we're asking to cover are equipment and vehicle purchases. I can tell you now, when you looked at our FY21 test year, boy, we looked healthy as a natural gas utility. Our fund balances were great, everything was wonderful. What we were doing is holding on to our cash a little bit in the gas utility. If you look at our system, we're a joint utility system. We have gas, water, wastewater, solid waste. The cash we were holding on to in the gas utility was supporting the high bond rating we were getting for the other utilities because our water rates were not sufficient, our wastewater rates were not sufficient, even our solid waste rates were falling behind. We've gone through those reviews and we're finally seeing our revenues becoming sufficient in those other utilities, so we were able to stop deferring maintenance of our system and invest back into that infrastructure. Even though the rate review includes equipment purchases, I can tell you for fiscal year 23, when you see our budget, it's based on today's known revenues, not in anticipation of any rate increases. Because of that, I've eliminated pretty much all the equipment purchases scheduled for natural gas for FY23 because we don't have the money anymore. The fund balances aren't there anymore as we approach FY23. I've also reduced their operational expenses rather significantly to ensure that we stay in line with current revenues. So even though the rate review includes anticipated equipment purchases, I can tell you when you look at FY23, I think I only allowed them $100,000 to replace some aging vehicles. So you'll see that in the budget coming up. But again, that's why we do a rate review. So to that end, if the increase is not approved, we will still meet the salary and benefit increases mandated by the city. That's not something we'll take back. But in order to do so, I will have to cut operation and maintenance expenses even more. I can tell you the deputy director for natural gas is probably already pretty mad at me because I cut his budget so significantly for next year, though he's handling it very well and his staff is great. We would continue to defer any vehicle or equipment replacements. One piece of equipment is simply for detecting leaks within your line system and replacing those pipes. I can't buy it. We're not going to next year, and he'll have to wait even longer if we defer our rates. In addition to that, we will stop all capital infrastructure and repair projects, or not stop them, but defer them. That means we're going to have to take the most critical lines, and those are the only things we can work on. Any lack of sufficient revenues does impact the safety of the system. As you know, we are highly regulated on the federal side for gas safety. There's not a person in this room, in my department, in our board, or with our counselors who wants to be responsible for neglecting a system that can be so impactful should something go wrong. And I don't want to say anything negative or too extreme, but this is something that is dangerous that we need to protect. It's why we have specialists. It's why we do so much work on leak detection. It's why we schedule repair for our system, is because putting that energy through the ground is a highly safety-sensitive object, and it's not something that any of us can afford to neglect. So I want to go a little bit through the actual rate-making process. Essentially what happens is the LCU board hears from staff. We tell them, Mr. Board Member, we're already starting to see that we're eating into our fund balances. We've already identified that we have issues in our leak system or in our line protection system that we need to address in order to ensure safety. We know there are projects out there where pressure is not sufficient. When we had the Arctic freeze in 2011, I believe, we actually had one area of town that went down and we had to go back and relight furnaces. And that's not something you want to happen in an emergency. The rest of the city was fine. Our recent freeze that we had last month, we lost a couple of customers in the Sonoma area because the pressure was too low. And that can be dangerous for them too. So the project we were doing at Liheap was to increase the pressure to those areas. So those are all identified, and we know we have to take care of them. So staff tells the LCU board, revenues are not sufficient. We're looking 3-4 years into the future. We're not going to have enough money. We need to do a rate review and consider, is our rate sufficient for our operations? We contracted with NewGen. They created a preliminary report, and I do have representatives from NewGen with us here today. If you need to get into the more technical details, they can answer that for you. Once the preliminary report's ready, we go to a UCAG process. That's our Utilities Customer Advisory Group. It's part of our rate review process. That UCAG has a series of public input sessions. So this year, due to COVID, we had a hybrid of sessions. We had some in-person sessions, we had some Zoom sessions, and we encouraged email input and feedback. It's part of that huge 180-page packet that we sent you. You can actually see the customer comments. Obviously, nobody wants a rate increase. I don't, as an end user, I don't want a rate increase. As a department head, I understand the necessity of it. But that process allows our citizens to give us their input and what they think about the report proposal. So what's really interesting, and I think it actually quite legitimized this process, is after the public hearing and the UCAG's recommendations that went to the LCU board, our LCU board actually made changes to our original rate review and preliminary report. And what I mean by that is in past iterations of our rate process, it was like a quasi-judicial rate case process similar to what the PRC uses. So essentially for the public to have input, you had to hire your attorney or represent yourself in that case in order to, in order to have your comments heard. Sorry, my kids always make fun of me, I talk with my hands. But you actually had to go through that judicial process in order to make your comments. This way, through the UCAG, you simply submitted your public input, and that was shared and discussed among the committee as well as with our staff. So the UCAG brings its recommendations to the LCU board. The LCU board held 2 work sessions to discuss the public input, to discuss comments from the Green Chamber of Commerce, to discuss public input that came through at their level, and they make a final recommendation to you. So part of what our LCU board did was say, number one, we're listening on the way the utility operates with extension of gas lines. And so part of that recommendation is when we went through the preliminary report, we removed all gas line extensions that would expand the system. And so that was taken out based on the LCU board's recommendation. In addition to that, we heard from the Green Chamber and other public commenters about the fact that we're jumping rates so much and so significantly, particularly in the business class. So the board, in response to that, said, well, then we're going to not make this a 30% jump in year 1. We're going to give you a 3-year time period to make that jump gradual. So I want you to keep in mind, remember, we're already 11 years behind inflation from the test year. After the test year, we're going to be another 2 years behind when we start the new fiscal year by the time this is implemented. So now we're going to be about 13 years behind inflation. And then we still didn't include additional costs that we recognized in FY23, such as increased salaries and benefit expenses. So the board's response to that was to give us a 10% increase. So even then, we're still going to be a little bit behind the 8 ball as that phased implementation occurs, because we're not going to get the full 100% implementation in the first year of new rates. It's going to take us 3 years to get there. In addition to that, the LCU board was also very receptive when they listened to the public feedback regarding impacts of COVID and businesses in our economy trying to recover from that, and said, in that case, they're recommending to you that if you approve new rates to protect the system, that we not implement those rates until after the economic recovery surcharge has been fully recovered. And what that is, that's the surcharge we're charging per decatherm in order to recover the exorbitant costs of gas that we experienced during Winter Storm Uri. So thank you very much to my staff and to our attorneys who did an incredible amount of hard work to negotiate a lot of that Uri expense. So our recovery period, we were looking at a 3-year period, will be done by this summer. So we're hoping by June, July, August, we'll be done with the surcharge. And the LCU board thus recommended we hold off on any rate increases until we've completely recovered those funds. I do want to remind you, when it comes to the ECRS, we do not continue that into perpetuity. The way it works is the minute all that money is recovered and we've recognized that, it stops immediately. We don't keep charging that to our customers in hopes to build up some sort of secret fund or anything to that effect. Once the money is recovered, we're done. So then, once it goes through the LCU board, we get a final report, and that's the recommendation we're giving to you today. We bring that recommendation to you to council. Council discusses it, lets us know what your questions or concerns are, and then you direct us if we bring it forward for future action. So your options can be, we want to send it back to the LCU board for some tweaks or adjustments, or we're going to move it forward into a resolution in order to implement the rates. And again, like I said, this is part of your process as running the utility to set those rates. So the adjustments we're proposing to you today, I want to tell you first, we're only one of about 1,000 municipally owned natural gas utilities. They're very rare in the United States. Most utilities that work in energy are private, nonprofit, or investor-owned utilities, meaning they're there to make money off their citizens. That's not our goal. As a municipal-owned utility, our goal is maintenance of the system, safety, reliability, and most of all, affordable energy to our customers. We're not here to make a profit. If we were to, let's say, for example, I can't even think of a situation where we would actually make a profit, but, but for example, if our revenue estimates were very low and suddenly we had an excess amount of revenue, none of that benefits the city or the utilities department or myself or anybody else. Any of that would go back into the system itself, and it would be considered in the next iterations of rate review process. But again, we're behind the 8 ball when it comes to dealing with the last 11 years of inflation, plus the next 2 years that we've missed out on, and the next 3 years it'll take us to implement. So I can't imagine a scenario wherein that would happen. But there's no individual or department that just benefits. We're not going to suddenly buy gold carat, gold-plated work boots, which doesn't make sense with natural gas anyway, but that's not what happens in here. We're still responsible for the efficiencies and the responsible use of our ratepayer and taxpayer funds. Our goal is to maintain the system's resilience and reliability. For our new counselors, I would like to let you know that of those 1,000 municipalities, there are 4 in the nation that receive safety awards at the silver level. We're one of those award recipients because we do have a safe system. We were a bronze level winner. We're now a silver level winner. I can be honest with you, the only reason we're not at gold is we don't have enough money. And that's because they expect you to hire a lot more staff, provide more training, have a lot more resources dedicated to that system. And quite frankly, we just don't have it. And even if we were to try to get the gold award, resource-wise, there's no way we can. We just don't have enough money to make that absolutely super excellent gold level. But you do have a silver level utility when it comes to safety. In addition to that, you're here to maintain the excellent service that we provide for our customers and then enable the gas utility to fulfill its peak performance strategies. And a lot of those strategies have to do with safety. It's ensuring the pressures are there, ensuring that we're doing the right maintenance, that we're doing the right safety surveys, that we're constantly taking care of that system. I want to emphasize, as counselors and even our LCU board, we can't neglect the fact that the cost of doing business simply goes up over the last 11, 12, 13 years. And ultimately, at the end of the day, when we look at our natural gas system, it's your responsibility to say, yes, we gave you the resources necessary in order to do your jobs. So regarding the rate proposal, when we look at our revenue requirement, that means how much revenue does the City of Las Cruces natural gas system need in order to meet its operations, its principal, and its cash for capital. So the revenue at current rates, we found there was a deficiency of $1.46 million per year. So that means that we have to add $1.46 million to our revenues as soon as possible to meet our anticipated operational obligations. The big one is cash for capital projects or another, that's $1.92 million. As I mentioned to you, we need the money. There are very, very little capital projects. I believe I have for next year on the CIP, I want to say, and I apologize because I'm doing it off the top of my head. I don't have Joe with me, and he can spit those out. But we're rolling over $1.5 million for projects that are currently in process, And I'm pretty sure I don't have anything else scheduled for capital projects for next year. I'll have to double check. We may have one in emergency areas, but I had to cut all that out because the money's not there. The fund balance isn't there and the revenue's not there. For your information, I wanted to break out how does the rate work? Where is the money going? The blue bar is the biggest bar. Obviously, that's personnel. When you're looking at this chunk of blue bar and how much it's increased since the FY19 actuals and 20 actuals into the test year 21, that blue bar is the FY21 test year actuals. It is not the FY23 actuals, which now includes our new pay grades and our pay amounts. And that also includes our benefits like insurance benefits and things the city provides for employees. The orange bar is repairs and maintenance. You can see how much I've had to cut back on repairs and maintenance in order to meet the other demands. The gray is other operating expenses. That's staying pretty fixed, and it's staying pretty fixed for FY23. It's actually declined a little bit. And then the last is shared services. So that's the amount of money per decatherm that goes to shared services to operate the utility. So those are things like our administrative services, our billing services, our customer service area, our new connections, our meter mechanics, our field services people, my office. And of that yellow bar, half of it's going to the city. Or not quite half, I'm exaggerating, it's less than half, but a significant amount is going to the city's general fund because that pays for the city's administrative services that are provided to the department. So those things are like HR, IT, I won't say facilities maintenance because we take care of our own, but there are several administrative services that we pay for. Engineering services when we work in conjunction with Public Works to lay lines when they tear up roads. So that's the breakdown of that per decatherm or that revenue that's coming in. The next one is equipment. Again, this is the test year. We estimated that we would need $1 million per year for equipment, and that's pretty on standard for us. I can tell you for next year, it's not there. I don't have the fund balance for it. But this is the funding that we need to replace vehicles and equipment. So again, we're not speculating that I have to buy a gigantic backhoe in anticipation that we may lay a major line. That's not how it works. It is what equipment do you have today, what equipment is aging out, what do you need to have replaced, and what do you know you're going to need. So this goes back to the known and measurable changes. I can't speculate when it comes to a rate review. Now this is the big question. And as a city councilor and as an official of the city, this is what you want to know is how are our bills going to be impacted per rate class? So we use a $2.50 per decatherm cost of gas and the decarbonization charge of 15 cents per decatherm. So when I add that in, that 15 cents per decatherm, that's our decarbonization rider that we'd like to use for future decarbonization projects for the natural gas system. So if you look at this on per rate class, we have our residential on the left and our small commercial on the right. So residents, your current average monthly bill for natural gas, again, this is average, it's not the winter bill, it's not the summer bill, this is your average bill based on our decatherms of usage, is gonna go from $26.87 a month to $28. So that's the jump after 3 years. It's going to be very gradual in that 3-year process. But at the end of the year, year 3, you'll see an average bill increase to $28.13. What's important about this is you'll see the fact that our residents are not as impacted with the rate suggestion increase versus something like small commercial. And what I mean by that, and when you look on the right, our bill impact over 3 years, the average bill of a small commercial customer in the City of Las Cruces utility system for natural gas is about $75 a month. Over 3 years, that average monthly bill will increase to $100. Again, this was the recommendation of our board to do the 3-year phase-in order to prevent that large jump in just 1 year for the customer, and it will grow to that. You may ask, why do you see a bigger impact to small commercial versus that to residential? So that's twofold. First of all, think about how we grow in the city of Las Cruces. We're getting more residential customers every year. I think Larry shared with you last year we had 900 certificates of occupancy added to the city, new homes. We didn't have 900 small businesses come onto that system. So when you look at the fact that the economies of scale, meaning the cost of running one big line down Del Rey Boulevard to serve, and I'm making up names, this is not a project, I'm just giving you examples. If I were to run a big line down a road and 200 customers hook up, that cost of that big line is shared by 200 customers. If I have to run a big line to serve one restaurant or one hospital and it's not shared with anybody else, that economies of scale means that commercial customer is going to absorb more of the costs. So when you look at our population growth, we see large residential growth over the last 10 years. We have not seen large small business growth. So the way we do our rate setting is our consultant goes in and calculates what's the cost of service delivery for this rate class. Service delivery cost to residential is easy. It's one line. Maybe we needed a reg station to lower the pressures to get it there. It's a few yellow pipes in the ground, and it's easy peasy, easy to do, inexpensive, and the economies of scale is different. When it comes to a small commercial or large commercial, it takes a lot more. It takes a bigger meter, it takes a bigger line, it takes bigger maintenance, and so that's how we break it down during rate classes. In the past, when we did this quasi-judicial process, my understanding, and again, this is just my understanding, was we just came to a settlement agreement saying, you know, by the time the protesters come in, or the protestants, and everybody has their opinion on, all the attorneys file their thoughts on what everything should be, we just come to a settlement. Small commercial is going to be X, residential is going to be Y, large industrial is going to be Z, and that's it. We've taken that to actually reflect the expenses of maintaining the system per rate class. We saw this with water and wastewater. It was a big change. We're seeing it now for natural gas, but what's nice is moving forward, this is going to be our rate setting process. And we're actually allocating the expense of delivering that service to the appropriate rate class. So this is the option that our board has recommended to you, is if you look at our residential rate first, our access charge did not change. Because again, remember, it's very inexpensive to actually access the natural gas system when it comes to a house. And you're sharing that a much bigger user class. So the access charge would remain the same. The volume charge, oh, I'm sorry, I apologize, that's a different rate class. The access charge would go up to $14.50 by year 3. So every single customer who has a natural gas connection will automatically pay $14.50 every single month just to access the system. And so right now it's at $13.75, and over a 3-year period, that new access charge would be $14.50. It's our volume charge that didn't change, the per decatherm charge that did not change for residential. And again, it goes back to that economies of scale and the number of individuals in that user class. You also want to keep in mind when it comes to this kind of rate, customers for whom we provide our services, we build our system to cover them in their peak demand areas. So in other words, me as a natural gas customer, I think my bill is just the access charge, maybe $1 or $2 every month in July. But in December, I've got 6 people living in my house who are always cold. And so my charge is much higher in the winter. So as a user, I demand way more in the winter than I do in the summer, but you, as a utility provider, have to provide me at that demand level. So whatever I need for the winter, you have to build your system to provide me at that level. In addition to the implementation of the access charge changes to residential, we'll also phase in the decarbonization rider. So it'll be 5 cents in the first year, 10 cents in 2, and 15 cents in year 3. So this is what your residential bill would look like. In the new rate, I'm sorry, this is what your bill looks like compared to other providers. So currently in residential, we're proposing the access charge and volume charge at residential, and you'll see the breakdown there in our current as well as proposed. When you look at New Mexico Gas Company, they push more of their rate onto the per decatherm usage. And so they they push more of their costs there, but they're still at a higher rate than we are when you consider all the factors. Zia Gas is our neighboring gas utility. They service a lot outside of the county and in surrounding areas. We actually deliver gas to Zia Gas so they can deliver it to their customers. But when you look at their average residential bill, they're still higher than we will be. So even at our proposed rate, we still stay under New Mexico Gas Company and Zia Gas. New Mexico Gas is the largest gas company in New Mexico. They serve primarily up north in the Albuquerque area. But we did want to give you a comparison because that's always a question. How do you compare it to other utilities that are in our area? And so we are lower when it comes to the per decatherm charge. Our next rate class is the small commercial rate. And that one, again, we increased the access charge from $16.41 with the 3-year implementation phase-in, and it would end at a $17.50 per month access charge. So again, every business that is on this rate class, their monthly bill will include, for their gas connection, $17.50. This is where we saw a big change in the volume charge, jumping from $1.07 in the current rate to $2.38. So what that told us was all the rest of the rate classes were subsidizing the small commercial class. So you'll notice there was no change in the residential rate because once you take that subsidy away and small business has to pay for itself, we didn't see a need for changing the residential rate. Again, the decarbonization would be phased in over 3 periods. The next one is the large commercial rate. Again, we see not a big jump, but a jump in the access charge. And it goes from $214 to $230 per month. Again, monthly bill will be $230. And that would come in after year 3. Here, the volume charge, we saw a jump, not a huge jump, but a jump, in order to recapture the costs of what it costs to deliver gas to that service. So again, this tells me as a director, the residential per decatherm charge was supporting our commercial charges. So while we do this adjustment, we can give relief to the residential charge. So your residents are paying less per decatherm, and now the businesses are paying for what it costs to actually get the services. And again, the decarbonization rider is a 3-year phase-in. So we just took a random, how many average decatherms is a small commercial business? How would that impact their bill? And then how do we compare with other utilities? We did the same thing. You see how much lower we are in Las Cruces on our current rates at $194.74 a month versus the proposed, it would jump for $414. I do want to remind you, though, this is after year 3. We're not going to jump from a $200 bill to a $400 bill in 1 year. This will be after a 3-year phase-in. And you'll see that New Mexico Gas Company, again, one of the largest in the state, and Zia Gas would be more expensive. New Mexico Gas is lower, but they have a much, much larger commercial backbone than we do. Think about the city of Albuquerque and how many more businesses are there demanding natural gas versus the city of Las Cruces. So we do kind of expect that they'll have a less demand charge because they have more users hooking up into that infrastructure and that line. One question that came up during our public comments and during our board meeting was, what do we do to ensure, as we're implementing new rates, as we're taking care of the system, how do we address customers who simply can't afford it? On that end, we do have utility payment assistance funds. So as a rate reviewer, we don't look at every customer saying, well, you have a lower income, or you have a higher income, or this area is wealthier than another area. We don't look at that. We look at how much does it cost to get this service to the flame? How much does it take for us to deliver that service to the flame? And that's all it is. It's very blind, and it doesn't think about those questions. So in order to address that, what we do have, and the council several years ago implemented this, was having utility payment assistance funds that we administer through Casa de Peregrinos. So you guys give us about $150,000 a year. You gave us more at the last budget adjustment because when we started shutoffs again, we had a huge demand for that assistance. And the council was incredibly generous to say, we're not going to let people shut off. We're going to keep helping until we get through this, this period. So with that, just in FY21, which was our test year, we helped 11,085 customers and 47 commercial customers. In FY21, we also do promise to pay, which are 2-week billing extensions. So this could be something like my alternator went out and I have to make that replacement. It's my only vehicle, but I'm going to get paid again in 2 weeks. What can I do? And we did work with 7,800 customers on those promise to pay agreements. And then we have payment plans too. So our customers can come in, and I have one customer, for example, her gas bill went up $80, and it was economically difficult for her to meet that. The rest of the system can't support that one individual's inability to pay, but the city can, and we do that through a payment plan. So what she's done is now she just pays an extra $10 every month on all her subsequent bills until she catches up on that $80 big bill that she had. And so that's something that we do with our customers. So we're not having the system subsidize that individual. We're working with them to make sure that they are able to meet the needs of, and obligations of not only their bills, but economically what the decisions they have to make. And like I said, the council has been very generous in helping us achieve this. And so by working with Casa de Peregrinos, we qualify the individuals, we know who uses it. I can tell you, this is not a repeat customer deal. We don't see the same people over and over and over and over again asking for help. It's usually just a one-time, and you know how it is. I mean, I'm sure, I know when I was in college, if something happened, it felt like it was going to destroy us financially. You know, we would just eat yogurt and ramen for 3 weeks until we could get through that crisis. Because to my 19-year-old self living on my own, an extra $300 bill was an economic crisis for me. And so we want to work with our customers. But it's interesting, they're not repeat customers. Of our 40,000 customers that work with a utility, it's a handful of individuals, and they come to us, and we can help. In addition to that, we have our Liheap assistance program. This is a federal and state program. In FY21, we had 992 individuals qualify for that program, and this helps pay their energy bills, which includes natural gas. We also have our budget payment plans. We have about $274. So for those customers who need to normalize their monthly expenses, for me, it's not a big deal. Now, if I have a $75 gas bill versus a $200 gas bill, I can absorb that into my budget. But for other individuals, I need to have a normal monthly expectation and monthly payment. So we do have those payment plans available. And then we also have preferred payment dates. And this means the customer can actually select when their payment date is. I remember my husband got paid once a month. That was rough for us to be ready to be paid once a month. And having a preferred date to hit after your paycheck is incredibly helpful. We're also exploring a new program to fund assistance through voluntary contributions to customers. So in other words, if I want to pay a little bit more on my bill to contribute to a needs-based program, we can roll out that option to our customers. So that's something we're exploring. I don't want to get too much into it because we haven't looked at the technical details and what you can do and how we have to comply with anti-donation and those kind of questions. But these are things that we've been looking into that other utilities do. So just as a recap, based on the FY21 test year, not the FY23, FY21 test year, I can tell you we're short about $1.46 million a year in revenue, and that shortage can impact the safety of our system and the safety and efficiency we guarantee to our customers. The rate review addresses immediate costs of maintaining the existing system as it exists today to keep it reliable and safe for our customers. So the next steps. As I mentioned to you earlier, the LCU board has recommended the rate increase we proposed today in the charts that I've shown you. They recommended the 3-year phase-in period in order to deal with the shock that may happen to the commercial class and the small commercial class. They also recommended that we not implement new rates, and so if you do approve a resolution moving forward, then our commodity recovery surcharge, once it's complete, sometime around July or August, that's when it will kick in. Then we will bring a formal resolution on which the council will vote. That's it for me, and I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Delilah. Let's see who has any questions. I have a quick one on page 12. Okay, so this gas rate proposal, I see where you have the revenue requirement. So is this an annual amount?
Correct.
Okay. And do you know how the city has, we have reserves set aside for 2 months, 2 to 3 months. Does your department do that as well?
Mr. Mayor, yes, we do. We have reserves in our funds. I can tell you for gas, those reserves are pretty low right now. We're not even meeting the requirement that our board has recommended.
Which is?
Oh, I want to say it's a weird number. It's like 3/16 or something like that. It's an odd number. But it was 6.85% is what it worked out to in reserves.
I mean, is it like 2 months reserve, 3 months reserve?
It's about 2 months reserve.
I'm sorry.
2 months?
2 months.
Yep, but in the gas utility, I've not been able to meet reserves for
So-
FY23.
So there is a suggested reserve in the gas utility?
Yes,
And do you know what that is?
I'll have to look it up, I'm sorry.
Same, maybe 2
Yep.
months?
I'm sorry, it's, the recommended is not on here. I think it's 6.35%. For FY23, I anticipate it'll be 1.84%. So essentially be a few $100,000 in reserves.
So does that maybe equate to 1 month, 2 months? I mean, I guess maybe that's
It
how.
would help me cover payroll for a month.
Okay, so now that's just for gas. That's not your overall.
Correct.
Your budget probably is quite large.
Yeah, it's-
What is the total?
I think it's 115 million.
115 million? So what percentage does gas represent of that 115 million approximately?
It is 30, I want to say 37%.
Okay.
And we go by customer size. So gas is the largest portion of that. And I had a pie chart I just looked at yesterday, but it's hard. I don't have a very eidetic memory, but I'm pretty sure it's close to 37%. I know it's more than the rest of the utilities.
But as for your overall budget for the entire utilities, you do have the 2 months
Yes.
of reserve.
Yes, because we operate as a joint utility, correct.
So theoretically, if this was to go down, because this is part of your overall budget. So in essence, you kind of do have reserves for this.
No. And the reason I say no, Mr. Mayor, is because I can't charge water customers to pay for gas customers.
Okay, I understand that, but you do have a reserve, though, for the whole thing, for your whole, your entire utilities department, right?
Mr. Mayor, that's correct, but it is broken down to the money that actually belongs to that individual utility. So for example, for Uri, the gas department borrowed over $1 million from solid waste in order to pay that bill because they didn't have enough cash on hand to do it.
Okay. And I think what you were asking about, just general maintenance and upkeep, I mean, that's normal. I mean, and that's a responsible thing to do. So you're assuring the council that there are no additional expansion of lines of any sort?
That's correct, and you'll see that in our CIP when it comes to council for our budget for FY23.
Okay, all right. I'll let council if there's any other questions, and then we'll let the others that wish to speak. So Mayor Pro Tem, and then
Oh, there's so many others. Councillor Graham was first, Becky, Cran, and then.
Oh, okay, so Councilor Graham, Karan, and Gandara. I mean, when I looked, there was no lights, so, okay. All right. So it's
Thank you,
plugged,
Mayor,
yeah.
and thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, for rationing out some speaking time. I appreciate that. Thank you to Director Walsh for this. I know it's hard to make information that's technical palatable to folks like me, so I appreciate the effort. My primary question, can we return to slide 20, please? I suspect that part of the answer is here, but I need a little more clarity. Can you explain to me the difference between small commercial versus large commercial? And the final bullet point there looks like it refers to decatherm use. Is that what dictates what class the customer falls into?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Graham. Yes, so it's decatherm use, but more primarily meter and line size. So what it takes to, if I were to run the heater in my house all day long, summer, winter, whatnot, my decatherm use would obviously be artificially inflated. So it's more based on the meter size and the line size to deliver the peak demand to that customer. And as far as small commercial and large commercial, Grant, can I ask you to answer that question? I know you and Joe worked more closely with it, and I'm missing my Joe today.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Grant Raven with NewGen Strategies and Solutions. We assisted the city staff in this this study. So the 0 to 4,000 decatherms per year, it's an annual number, is how the small commercial class is defined. There are some other parameters around the definition of the class that expand beyond that, but that's a general rule for this defining the small commercial class. It may be worth noting that small commercial for New Mexico Gas Company is a much larger group of customers. In other words, you can consume a substantially more volume of gas and still be considered small commercial for New Mexico Gas Company than for the city of Las Cruces, which somewhat explains the bill comparisons here that you're seeing on your screen. It also, just for context, if you're comparing this slide to a couple of slides before, you may notice that the average bill numbers seem different. This slide, for comparing against other utilities, specifically is just looking at the access charge and the volume charge, the base bill components. It doesn't include, for example, the cost of gas, because the cost of the gas commodity itself can vary between these ZIA, New Mexico, us. So to take that out of the comparison, we're just comparing the base bill components. So,
Thank you. And to make it even easier for me to understand, Director Walsh, this might be at you. I'm not sure, sir, if you're local or not to us. When I hear small commercial, I'm picturing Beck's Coffee. They would be small commercial, but how big can you be? Can you give me a comparison that I'll understand?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Graham, absolutely. And that is most of our businesses in the city of Las Cruces. I would say about 99% of them will fall in the small commercial class. The large commercial would be like a hospital or I think a large motel maybe, or hotel, a really large facility. We have industrial users too. Like NMSU, Solopec, the cheese plant, Saputo, not Solopec, Saputo at the cheese plant. But most of our businesses are the small commercial class.
Okay, so when I'm considering the impact on small commercial, Beck's and Walmart are going to be in the same commercial class.
and I'll apologize, I'm not familiar with whether or not Walmart is, what they're using for heating, for example, heating the facility. So I can't speak to Walmart in particular. I don't know how large a gas user they are. But generally speaking, most of your commercial businesses will be small enough to still be in the considered the small commercial class. It is a relatively small proportion of your overall commercial customer class that is large enough to be using more than 4,000 decatherms annually on the system.
Okay.
And if I knew of a particular customer, I would tell you.
I'm asking you to be an expert on Walmart, but I think I'm just trying to conceive of, and I understand this is probably more of a gut reaction, asking a really small single owner to bear the same sort of burden as a national franchise, just trying to scope it out in my head.
Absolutely. And Mayor, Councilor Graham, again, that's when we start working partnerships for efficiency efforts. If you are a small business owner, come talk to us. I'll give kudos to Lucio. I think he's out here now. He's our deputy director. There he is. Wave your hand, Lucio. He's actually just met with 3 homeowners who are considered in a very low-income area, low-income homeowners in a older part of the town, and just did an efficiency survey with them for free to say, these are the recommendations. You can seal up your envelope. You can place your appliances. What can we do to help you with that? He's actually kicked off a pilot program so we can try that. That same service is existent for our small businesses too. If they'd like to sit with us and talk about an energy audit and how to best make them more efficient, That's where we're going to see the savings, because the less decatherms you use, the less you're going to pay.
Okay. Thank you. That's the end of my questions for now. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Coran?
Thank you. Sorry, actually, that was somewhat related to the question that I wanted to ask in terms of reducing use, but I wonder if there's also the possibility of something like small business assistance or support, very similar to what exists for individual residential customers in this transition, because I am particularly sensitive to the fact that inflation has affected everyone, and especially small businesses, and this is sort of an extra hit. They survived the pandemic, and now they're going to have to face something like this, and I know that in some cases, doing things like cooking with something other than gas would really not necessarily be a feasible option for them. I'm wondering if there is a like I understand an efficiency audit and those types of efforts, but I also wonder if there are sort of similar overtures for people in that class to be able to address their sort of heating bills or their gas bills in ways that are not so dramatically impacting them as this seems like it would just by this. So.
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Coran. That's an absolutely valid point, and obviously as a utility, I'm very open to any programs that the City Council would like to put forth, or we can work with community development on that. I will let you know our assistance program traditionally has only been open to residents. However, during COVID-19, you authorized that to be open to businesses also. So it's not unheard of. It's simply a matter of funding it or determining, do we split those funds between residents and commercial, which we can do, and that's absolutely something that we can and have done due to the pandemic. And in addition to that, and that's one of the reasons we're so far behind on the rate class, we actually paused this during the biggest surges of COVID because we knew businesses were already suffering. We saw it when we were trying to help them with utility assistance. And so that's why we're actually 2 years behind where we want to be on bringing this recommendation forth.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and I really appreciate your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Delilah, for your presentation. I always get so much out of it when you present. So some of my questions are around employees, because you said operationally, right? This is where some of the money needs to go. So I have questions about what currently, how many employees do you have? How many vacancies do you have? What will, in the next 3 years, will you try to do related to filling those vacancies?
And Lucio, I may call you up to speak to your department numbers on vacancies if you wouldn't mind stepping forth. I can tell you again, I wish I'd printed that out. I just looked at it on Sunday. I believe we have 56 employees. 57. I was so close. Lucio, if you could just address the number of employees and vacancies.
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor, Council. In the gas utility, we have...
You might want to introduce yourself.
Lucio Garcia, Deputy Director for the City of Las Cruces Natural Gas.
How are you? It's been a long time.
Doing well, thank you.
Yeah.
In our gas utility, we have 57 FTEs, full-time employees. We currently have 3 contract employees, and we employ 8 temporary employees. So a total of 68.
68 employees that are on the ground currently.
On the ground.
Okay, and then how many vacant?
Of those, we have 6 of the FTEs that are vacant.
That just only 6 vacancies?
Yes.
Wow. Okay, all right, that's helpful. So then would most of the money, if you got this raise, if we raise the utility rate, be for not only doing that, but equipment and vehicles, and what would that look like in terms of within the next 3 years? Those vehicles that, because you made a comment, Delilah, like it's just like, oh, we're not, this would be really nice to have, we don't really need it. It's mostly what we are in need of.
Correct. And so when it comes to employees, at one point we actually had 15 vacancies in the gas utility, and Lucio's worked really well with our HR department to make sure we get those full, because they're highly specialized positions.
Correct.
It's one of the hardest position groups to hire for because you have to be a licensed plumber or you have to be a very highly certified welder. It's a dangerous system that we work with. But what we do is when we have vacancies, as Lucio mentioned, we have temporary employees. We also have to contract with plumbers. So no matter what, we're going to realize that expense in order to keep the system going. When it comes to capital, this is what we estimated. $11 million for the operation and maintenance, which includes employees, and about $1.92 for capital. And that's for the actual purchases of large equipment and for pipe and things like that. So the large equipment would fall into that $1.92 million. I can tell you for FY23, I think I only have $100,000 budgeted for vehicles and equipment.
Yes, I remember you saying that, but can you give me very specific things? I need you to build a case for me that this is warranted, and I'm not sure that it is at this point. So can you give me specifics in terms of equipment, what is needed in the next, 3 to 5 years?
Yep. Unfortunately, I don't have my equipment sheet with me. I'll pull it up. But Lucy, I don't know if you have anything that you can add, at least on the fly, of the equipment we're missing, just because you're the one whose budget I had to cut.
Afternoon again, Mayor, Council. As far as equipment, we're talking about heavy equipment, which are backhoes and vehicles to get us to the job. In addition to that, there's specialized equipment that we utilize for maintaining the system, changing out valves using a stopple and the equipment required with it. Also, in addition to it, I don't know if you know this, but one of the services we provide that other utilities do not is we maintain the utility part. That's under the federal jurisdiction, which is Department of Transportation. The other thing that the council has tasked us with doing is also providing relights. So when our customers lose those types of service, whether it's due to an outage or they smell CO2, our technicians are licensed as plumbers through the Uniform Plumbing Code and Mexico CID to be able to go in and do that. Most other utilities only do the work on the utility side. So that entails minor equipment, such as CIG, which is combustion gas indicators when we do our gas leaks, and any probing that we do throughout the house to check for gas leaks. That's just a small sample of the equipment that we would utilize.
Thank you so much. I know there were some issues with some neighbors down the street, and you all were so good about responding quickly and sort of saying, this is not for us, but you do that. I know that there's that service, so I appreciate that very much.
Yes, we cross over to provide that service.
Yes, thank you.
And if I may, this is Grant Rabin again with NewGen. Just to add on to that answer, in addition to the vehicles and equipment that were discussed, approximately $1 million of that $1.92 million number is related to renewals and replacements of the existing gas infrastructure itself, not rolling stock, not equipment, but not to extend the system out to new customers, but just to keep and maintain the existing pipe that's in the ground and compressors and the equipment that's running the actual, not equipment like mobile equipment, but like compressor stations, major equipment. It's necessary to put capital back into the system to keep those things in proper operation and also replace them on a recurring schedule so that they don't become so out of date and so aged that they become an issue of safety, or you get behind and you have to, make emergency repairs to the system more often to address emergencies that arise instead of doing it a more preventative maintenance type of pattern. So,
I appreciate that. Delilah, you made mention 2 very specific examples where we lost Pressure, yes, ma'am. And you identified where they were. And do you have an idea that this is something that needs to be replaced or rehabbed, if you will, so that doesn't happen in the past? And if are those more those are places but how do you identify those that you don't know? And do you have a list of some sort that you can present to council that says these are absolute, from next year on, these are the places from priority 1 through 10 that we have to get done every year?
Correct. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem. Absolutely. First of all, we do that in the CIP when we present it to you all. We've already outlined and identified what our high priority areas are for the entire utility. And then, of course, it's just based on funding. Regarding, have we identified it? Yes, we do a MOAP. I think it's an analysis of our pressure in our entire system. So we actually have staff out there checking pressure at different parts of the city. And Lucio, can you explain that again? Of how we do our planning for the pressures and rehab.
Mayor Pro Tem, Lucio Garcia, Deputy Director for Natural Gas. In reference to the pressure, we do have a model. We've generated a model, which is a finite analysis model of our pressures throughout the system. So our model has matched up with what we've seen out in the field. There are areas that within our service territory which are outside the city limit, because as you know, our service territory expands beyond the city limits. And areas north of town towards Del Rey, Donaian, are areas where we experience low pressure, as well as in the Elks area and the Sonoma Ranch. And many of these areas, low pressure around Sonoma, is it's being developed. The infrastructure is not there to support as you move along until that infrastructure is built. So around the Donaian, which is Caijitas, Donaian Community College, we have experienced times when we have zero pressure there. And that's one project that was on the CIP and the master plan that's currently being done.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Delilah, and then finally, how old is our system?
Oh, I looked at that Sunday too. 1936. I was going to say 37, but we've operated the natural gas utility since 1936.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Bencomo?
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Delilah. You'd think I wouldn't have any more questions, but every time I'm in the vicinity of LCU, I learn something new. When you talked about the capital projects that you had cut for 23, can you tell us what some of those were that you cut and if that will have an impact on customers?
I know I cut out Del Rey because that was the only project we were going to move forward.
Expansion Del Rey.
The Del Rey in order to improve the pressure, and that's what Lucio just talked about. But that was really, we rolled over about $1.5 million for projects in process. So that includes like Caijitas and some of the rehab projects that we're closing up this year that we don't know if they'll be finished by the next fiscal year. So those are rollover funds. The really big one that was in there was the Del Rey improvement. And so that one I know I did cut out. I had already cut out quite a bit already. And really the only ones were having to do with the pressure improvements.
Can you, for the public, can you talk about what that means for customers to have low pressure?
So essentially, when the demand goes up, and I'm sorry, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Bencomo, when you have low pressure, it's typically in seasonal weather situations. So you don't have low pressure in the summer, nobody's making a demand on the system, but when we have those big temperature drops that we experienced back in February, or I guess it's still February, but over Valentine's Day weekend, as the demand on the system was pulled in order to heat homes and pull that gas to other places, the places where we don't have either a looped system or we're backing up with other pressures like the Del Rey area, that means gas will stop flowing and you face the danger of pilots going out. So that's the biggest impact to customers, is they'll lose their gas system. We hope they actually turn off their gas at the main rather than allowing it to come into their home. But that's the biggest danger we face, is pilots going out.
How many customers do you think this impacts?
How many customers impacted from low pressures?
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem. As far as customers throughout the city or service area, or just that specific area?
That specific area, Lucio.
The last one that we had, well, Elks, which is in 2017, we had an issue there and we lost about 500 customers.
Wow.
Took us a couple of days to bring back online. On Pegasus, next to Donaian Community College, it's a stretch of a neighborhood, so I'd have to say 80, 90 customers.
Okay.
Just off the cuff.
A significant amount,
Yes,
not
I
like
mean,
20.
one significant if it's you.
That's good answer, Lucio. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm curious, Delilah, on page 13, you spoke about operating expenses. Is there a reason, and this could probably lead into a whole other work session, but is there a reason that administrative services can't be done internally at LCU, and that would eliminate having you to pay in the city?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Bencomo, I'm not familiar with why we couldn't. I know Ifo and I, we talk all the time when I complain. Can I just do this myself? But there's not a prohibition or a reason not to. It's just something that we would have to work through in administration and city management to decide what is the best use of our resources. And I'll give it to our city manager. When we met with him over some of our like fleet repairs and whatnot, I'll tell you, our fleet office, they're great. They're like, we're going to be the best choice for you to make a repair to your equipment. So you don't have to go to an outside vendor to repair your equipment. We're going to be the most efficient and most effective and most cost-effective choice. So I don't think there's any prohibition on it. It's just something we'd have to explore of really, is there a cost savings or not?
And then behind you, I think.
Oh, sorry, Greg.
I was just going to contribute. Part of our study, again, Grant Raven with Nugent, part of our study was not to look at the specifically shared services and evaluate and audit, but generally speaking, so not talking about your situation in particular, but when we typically look at other utilities that are operating in this environment, which we would do a lot of work for municipal utilities, it's most often the case that the city is able to do that more efficiently than having the utility staff up for those services, because there's one city attorney, one HR, being able to incrementally just handle a few more, issues on behalf of the utility tends to, over the broad brush, be more efficient than staffing up the individual utilities. Again, I did no particular investigation of your city, but that's what we typically find.
That's helpful. And I don't necessarily think this would remedy this situation, right? But I just think Ifo and Delilah, I think it's worth doing an investigation on just what I know about the HR needs of the LCU. Sometimes I do feel like it would be best there. Again, I think I'll leave that there maybe for a conversation later on.
I think, Mr. Mayor, Councilor Bencomo, one thing about our city manager, he wants to know who's doing it most efficiently and give me a cost study. And you demonstrate to me how we're going to save money. So he does challenge us to save that money.
Okay, thank you for saying that. I totally agree. Can you go to page 20, please? Yes, okay. I'm having I'm having a hard time understanding this graph, Delilah. I'm hoping you can break it down further for me. Yep. So on this bullet point, you say that the average Las Cruces small commercial, the average use is 16 decatherms for small commercial. Is that what that says?
Yeah, again, this is Grant Raven Nugent. Just allow me, since I was responsible for putting this slide together, I'll take responsibility for what we're presenting here. So we did use an average per month user of 166 decatherms for the representative comparison between your utility and the neighboring utilities, in part because, for example, New Mexico Gas has a small commercial class that is so much bigger than yours. So we picked kind of a midpoint of your small commercial class. The reality is the average small commercial customer is using about a 10% of the amount shown in this slide. So they're more like 16 decatherms per month as compared to 166 decatherms per month. So, but the reason we're using this much larger volume for the comparison is just because when comparing to New Mexico Gas, it's difficult to make an apples-to-apples comparison amongst that small class, because small commercial to them means so much bigger customers than small commercial in the city.
Okay, so then, and of course, correct me if I'm wrong in understanding this, but then this graph doesn't really show the potential cost increase for an average Las Cruces user then.
So this,
so here's what I'm gonna tell you. When you show me that graph, that's a hard pill to swallow when I see that for a small business, right? And so I'm curious about showing a graph that is more proportionate to what an actual Las Cruces small commercial would use, so that people don't faint when they see that.
again, Grant Raven, that makes perfect sense, and I guess I would direct you to the, no, I think it was on it. Oh, there you go. Yeah, this would be a graph that would show you, I think, what you have in mind, which is, so this graph on the right for small commercial is showing the bill comparison for the average small commercial customer in the class, which is likely more what you're asking for.
Yes, thank you. Okay, this is much more helpful. Back to Councilor Graham's question, which I thought was a great question in terms of the scope within small commercial. Is there a way for us to do different classifications within small business, like small business small and small business large? Because I feel like there is an equity issue when we talk about, you know, a small business that's employing 5 to 10 people versus a business that's employing 100 people.
Sure, and if I may, again, Grant Raven with Nugent. I'm not going to respond on behalf of the city about this idea, but I'll just give you my thoughts from an industry perspective. That is seemingly possible. Without doing the analysis, we can't know for sure, but my gut feeling, based off industry experience, is if you segregate out the really small commercial customers from the larger commercial customers, what's going to happen is you're going to find that the really small customers are even more expensive to serve under the cost of service analysis than what you have now. Basically, what you have now is the larger, bigger, and for lack of a better word, more efficient users of the gas system that are still in the small commercial class, because it includes a pretty large proportion of your overall commercial businesses, are pulling down the average cost of service for those very small customers. So my concern would be, if you segregate out the really small ones, I think what you're going to find is the opposite of what you were hoping for is going to come through. Is it's going to show that those larger customers you've peeled out and put on their own, their cost of service has dropped, and you've increased what we've identified as the cost of providing service to the very small customers in the class.
Interesting. Even though some small businesses may already be in residential areas, right? Like, you know, I appreciate Delilah's example of, you know, one pipe could serve all of these residents versus one pipe serving maybe the one business down there. A lot of small businesses don't have huge facilities, right? And the ones that do, I'm assuming, are using more gas.
Yeah, and so you can definitely pick out individual commercial customers, and you might get, you know, a different picture or view of the overall class. But it is true that, at least from you know, the way the customer is served off the line, from that perspective, you can have small commercial customers that look a lot like residential customers in that regard. But I'll also point out to you that in our cost of service analysis, in part because we've grouped those small commercial customers along with some other larger commercial customers in that class, the identified cost of service for small commercial is lower per decatherm than residential. So just saying, you know, so they are, as a class, being treated and recognized as being more efficient than residential. Residential is a slightly less efficient user of the overall gas infrastructure. And so it's because you have some larger customers sitting in the same class with small commercial that's bringing down the cost of service for the class for all of small commercial.
I mean, I feel like this could be worth some sort of research and investigation. Doesn't mean we have to act on anything, right? Like, it could just give us a lot of insight on something. And I know, Zella, you're literally telling me I don't have any more money for anything, for me to be asking for more studies, but I just, because I hear you, it might not, the outcome might not be what I'm necessarily thinking it would be, but I think it could, I don't know, right? And I just feel like it would be worth looking into.
So if I may, one other thought that I have on this topic is that, you know, the overall cost of service should be a guideline by which you assess what rates should be charged to customers, but there is room for policy discretion within rate design, which is part of what, you know, we're presenting in terms of issues to you guys. And so I guess what I'm suggesting to you is segregating out the customers into different groups for the purpose of calculating cost of service may not accomplish what you're thinking it might, but policy direction can in the place of that. And so I have some more expansive thoughts on how you guys might consider policy direction. Yeah, Yes,
Just
possibly.
kidding, sir.
But anyway, that would be my suggestion to you. If that's particularly what you're trying to address, policy may get you there.
Okay, thank you. And Delilah, I'm curious if you can, and this might be a tough comparison that I'm asking you for, but given the current storm rider, right, and what that has looked like for our bills, both of all classes, can you give a comparison as to what the current rider looks like versus year 1, year 2, and maybe year 3, or maybe to make it easier, just year 3?
I want to say we did it at 15 cents per decatherm, but I'm looking at staff because I don't know offhand. Do you guys remember what a rate rider was? Let me look that up. And I apologize, all my financial people could not be here today.
I think Mr. Simpson was good enough to volunteer. I think it's $1.69 per decatherm is the current surcharge. So once that surcharge goes away, it'll somewhat mitigate the proposed rate increases that are being proposed.
Oops.
And if that wasn't your question.
No, I guess I'm asking, like,
So I
the
appreciate
impact.
that.
How will we see it differently? How will we feel it differently?
So again, it's based on usage, and I apologize, I didn't have that number off the top of my head, so I appreciate the input if it's at $1.69 per decatherm. So if you look at our small commercial rate class, the differences between that 3-year implementation and the current rate is much less than the $1.69 per decatherm, because it's all volumetric based. So it's based on how many decatherms you use. So in the instance of the small commercial class, if we were to implement the rate in full, they would see actually a decrease in their bills based on their, and of course I can't speak to cost of gas because that's variant and based on the market. For residential, they'll obviously see a decrease of $1.69 per decatherm. That goes away on all the bills.
Okay, so what you're saying, so after the rider, what I'm hearing you say is, with the gas rate increase, it will look less than what the increase looks like now with the storm rider.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Ricomo, yes,
For
that's
all
correct.
classes?
Correct.
Okay, helpful, thank you. And then just my last sort of point here, Delilah, because I appreciate you naming what it could mean to customers and staff, your crews, if there is no increase, right? What that means in terms of safety. And I mean, frankly, the safety issues are one of the biggest reasons to move away from a gas utility, right? It is it's very dangerous, right? You have to have a lot of training, your staff have to have a lot of training. But I do appreciate you saying that, because I think for me what was helpful in the last rate review, even though it was just as difficult when we talked about waste, solid waste, that was a really difficult increase, but it literally translated to, if we don't do this increase, like, it could mean your trash does not get picked up every week, right? So I appreciate you naming the very concrete ways in which no increase at all could impact the system. Thanks, Mayor.
Councilor Beta, Councilor Flores.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Delilah. Most of my questions, luckily, have been answered, but I did want to go back as we're talking about addressing that aging infrastructure, and as it's been pointed out, there haven't been any increases or changes, which has been great for a lot of people and things, but we know that has consequences later on, and we're here at these points trying to make these decisions. When we are looking at emergency repairs, on average, how much more expensive is that than if we had scheduled maintenance?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Abeta, that's an excellent question. I know from the utility standpoint, on our personnel calculations, we already know it's 3 times the cost because we have to pay overtime, call out, emergency traffic control. We have to bring in emergency purchases and procurements. I'll give you an example. On University, we had a huge line repair for our water line, and it was easily 3 times the cost had we been able to repair that line ahead of time. So, Lucy, I don't know if you have an estimate on that. I'm just talking anecdotally on the cost.
Yes, I can. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, Bencomo. I'm sorry, Stubbe. Yes, the costs are, as Director Delilah Walsh mentioned, there are 2,
Can we have
3,
you
4
speak into the mic, please?
Yes. They can be up to 2, 3, 4 times as much. based on, emergency purchases, cost overtime, and then bringing in either consultants, engineers, or contractors to assist. Because many times I don't know specifically for water, but for gas, there are times that we need to bring contractors in to assist us with the repairs, whereas if it had been routine operation and maintenance, it would have been something we could have done in-house on our schedule.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And, looking forward, I do think that it's very important to make sure that we accommodate scheduled maintenance and repairs. As you said, it is a cost saving to all of the customers, whether it's residential or commercial. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councilor Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Delilah, for your presentation. You mentioned that LCU is 11 years behind, and if we agree to this today, it'll still be another 2 years before we see anything, so we're 13 years behind. Why are we 11 years behind? And I mean, I can do the arithmetic and figure out where the 13 comes from, but why are we 11 years behind?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Flores, that's an excellent question. And my understanding is the reason was the quasi-judicial process was so expensive in the original way that we did rates, that it was almost, I'll give an example. One employee shared with me that by the time we got through with the water rate case, all the new revenue went to paying off the rate case. And so it was just putting us in a hole. So my understanding is they were just avoided. It was, we'll just make do, we'll just make do, we'll just make do until it came to an emergency. Under our new strategic business plan, however, our board has directed us to review rates every 4 years, no matter what. And so again, we'll be starting this process again with wastewater.
Okay, so if we were to approve this today, how long would it take us to, we'd only be 4 years behind? After 13 years of being behind, we'll only be
6 years behind.
6 years behind. When will we catch up?
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Flores, my hope is we catch up within the next 2 cycles, that we stay on this because they're difficult. And having to increase the rates to adjust for 11 years worth of inflation is highly impactful to our residents. If we can do this every 4 years and try to get caught up and make those transitions happen, then the impact isn't so much, and it's not over such a long period of time. However, I would imagine in the natural gas, the next rate review is going to have the energy transition plan in mind.
And you're saying that that's in 4 years?
Yes, ma'am. Yep. So by the time we have a new transition plan in place, we don't know what that recommendation is going to be, how the recommendations are going to be for our infrastructure, or what we're doing, or how we're moving forward, how our community is moving forward with renewable energy. Those are a lot of big questions, but I'd imagine that transition plan and the demands of it are going to be part of the next gas rate review.
Okay, so in 2 years we'll be caught up, kind of, sort of?
We'll be about 4 years behind.
Excuse me, we'll be 4 years, and then 2 years from then we'll be 2 years behind, and then 4 years from that we'll be caught up. So we're looking at what, 16, 4 times 3 is 12. 12 years from
Councilor
today.
Flores, yes, I think it would take 12 years, but we're going to have that picture of energy transition to consider also in that time period.
Ooh la la. Okay, well, thank you very much, Ms. Walsh. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Curran.
I just have one more question that I think sort of goes to the questions that Councilor Bencomo was mentioning earlier. But when I look at I'm thinking about budgets as values statements, right? I'm thinking about that in this context. When I look at industrial rates bearing a fraction of the amount that small businesses do, it's troubling to me. And I wonder if you can explain why industrial has such a low requirement in this calculation, or I just don't think that shows our values. So.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Curran, it's not about values, it's the cost of service. And it takes a lot less to serve industrial because it's one big line running out to them. And then remember, an industrial user uses the same amount of gas no matter what the weather. So I don't have to build a line to meet your winter peak demand months. I have to build a line that meets your demand, period. So it's using the same amount. It's a lot more of an efficient user essentially, and so the infrastructure is a lot less. But I'll let Grant give more detail on that.
This is Grant Raven with Nugent, and I think that's a very good explanation and answer, Delilah. And that really boils it down. You know, the very large industrial users are more efficient users of the gas infrastructure. So when I say efficient, I don't mean they use less. I'm saying they're not peaking as much on your system as, for example, the residential customers that are using the gas in January and February to heat the home, and then in August, they're not using hardly any. An industrial user will more typically use a more similar amount of gas month in, month out. And so the size of the pipeline that you've constructed to serve them and all the facilities that go into serving that customer, they are more efficiently utilizing that infrastructure on an annual basis than customers that vary their consumption from month to month as seasons change.
So I guess I would ask a follow-up question, which is related to access versus volume. So that suggests that the access charge is static and related to their use, related to the infrastructure related to it, but the volume, changing the volume charge, which we're doing for every other class, I think, keeping that steady, I guess it's really a little bit hard for me to understand why that.
Fair enough, and I'll just observe or add to that comment that even though the volume charge shown on the screen is per decatherm, these volumetric charges are recovering fixed costs of the utility. So you're not recovering all your fixed costs to serve that customer through that access charge. You're actually recovering some of it through the volume charge. And there's several reasons why you would structure the rate in that manner. But that, I think, may be the disconnect. Unlike the gas commodity rider that recovers the variable cost of gas, you're actually recovering fixed costs inside of that volumetric charge. And that's part of the reason that explains why it may be counterintuitive to you that we're not adjusting the volume charge for that customer class.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Before we get to the audience, so I just have a quick question. So, I'm sorry, the name of the firm was?
Nugent.
Nugent. And so you hired them when?
Gosh. 2016, but not for the gas rate review.
But not for this rate review?
I apologize. I'm trying to remember.
If I may, again, Grant Raven. So the original contract for the rate reviews for the water, wastewater, solid waste, and gas engagement was signed around 2016. We are just now getting around to the gas portion of this. We started the gas rate review almost 2 years ago. I don't know the exact month, but we started this over a year ago, more like a year and a half to 2 years ago.
And so I guess my question would be, so I presume there was some type of report that was done?
Mr. Mayor, councilors, yes. Yes.
And so was that report given to the utilities board members? And I guess I was just curious why it couldn't have been included in council's
Mr. Mayor, councilors, it was, and we included it in the technical report. That's the 180-page document that you received from utilities.
When did we get that? You got that last week? So it was in there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, my apologies. Okay, just wanted to make sure about that. So if there's nothing further, now, please remind me who is out there that wished to speak. Senator Hamlin and Debbie Moore. Okay. So if you want to come forward, you needed how much time? 3 minutes. 3 minutes? We're feeling a little generous. We can give you 5 if you want.
Mayor,
Yes?
was Mr. Simpson giving a presentation?
I don't see him. Oh, there he is.
He's right there.
Oh, wow, okay. I'm sorry, I only seen you once. I think he does have a presentation.
He does, he does.
Okay, good.
Mr. Mayor, thank you, council. It's so nice to see all of your faces here today. My name is Carrie Hamblin. I'm here in my capacity as CEO and president of the Las Cruces Green Chamber of Commerce, representing over 200 local small businesses and indirectly thousands more, including over 3,000 small commercial gas customers that Las Cruces Utilities serves. I do appreciate the discussions that Las Cruces Utilities have been willing to make regarding the increase. It's been a very animated conversation and very concerned about all of the things that we've that Delilah has already addressed. Until recently, Las Cruces Utilities ratepayers were represented by a ratepayer advisory board, a ratepayer advisory council rather, which was provided a consultant and attorney to represent customer interests, including those of small commercial customers, whenever a rate hike was proposed. The provision was eliminated by the council in 2016, leaving only the city council itself to evaluate the viability of the utilities case, with no provision for the detailed analysis that normally accompanies utility rate cases. Now, the Las Cruces Green Chamber of Commerce is proud to have filled that gap by contracting with utility expert Philip Simpson to conduct an analysis of the current LCU rate request, and he will be giving a presentation to you on his findings. He has an undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering from Georgia Tech and a master's degree in electrical engineering from New Mexico State, along with a second master's from New Mexico State in economics with a concentration in public utilities regulation. Over the past 4 years, he has been a regular intervener in cases before the State Public Regulation Commission. Mr. Simpson is accustomed in his work before the PRC and its hearing examiners to rigorous examination of assumptions and conclusions. He brought this same rigor to bear on the case at hand, and we're very proud of the report and its value it provides for council decision making. Of particular concern to the Green Chamber when we first became involved in this process was a proposed 42.7% increase in gas rates for small commercial customers to be imposed as they struggle to emerge from a worldwide pandemic that we are still not out of, I'd like to remind you, a difficult economy, and the utilities' imposition of a rate rider for Winter Storm Uri. Fortunately, and in large part a result of issues raised during the rate request process by Mr. Simpson, the rate burden on small commercial customers has been reduced. There would be a phase-in of any rate increase, or no increase would be imposed until the Winter Storm rider has been removed. The utility has also decided to eliminate the cost of taking on new debt for line extensions, a step that the Green Chamber is very grateful for, we support and endorse. Still, though, the current proposal of 33.4% increase in monthly gas bills for our small business community is unacceptable, especially for a city-owned utility, and especially when clear alternatives exist. Mr. Simpson will point those alternatives out as he reviews his findings for you today. And before I welcome my colleague Debbie Moore to the podium, doing a little bit of the math is that businesses can't afford these costs right now. The difference between what right now, the $194.74 a month, comes out to $2,336 and some change every year. The $414, do I get just like another minute? Thank you. I appreciate that. The $414.17 comes out to $4,970. That's a $2,600 difference. That is a refrigerator for a small business, and I want you to think about Beck's, Willow and Blaine, Indulgence Cafe, Salud de Mesilla, Downtown Desert Yoga, any of the small businesses that you all frequent, and I know you do because I've seen you there. Think about these and what would happen to those businesses if a refrigerator broke, if their plumbing or electrical work needed to be redone, if their stove or oven needed to be fixed, if they had heating and cooling issues. We all know that during a time of challenge, especially financial challenge right now, that any one of these items, any one of these catastrophic items is going to cost you at least $2,600. That could make or break a business. And unfortunately, during this time, we have already seen businesses close. And my colleagues with the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce, the Economic Development Department with the City of Las Cruces, the Lift Fund, Small Business Development Center, West, a number of other, Arrowhead Center, all have worked together to try and help our businesses thrive and survive during this time. A gas rate increase right now is not going to help them. And so Mr. Simpson will be giving his presentation to you, but I would like to welcome Debbie Moore, my colleague with the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce, to speak to you, if that's allowed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Council, for all your work.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it. Hi, Debbie. Just need you to state your name, please.
Debbie Moore, President and CEO of the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce. I could say one big ditto, Mr. Mayor. I was going to lead in to several of the councilors' comments. Since March of 2020, when COVID hit, I've been in the trenches with many businesses. they are just now coming out. We are definitely not out of COVID, and the Greater Las Cruces Chamber agrees that this is not the time. I'm real concerned about where we're going to be over the next 3 years, how this is going to impact them. So at this point in time, we stand in opposition to this. I will say this to Delilah and her staff. If this by chance goes through, we're here to help get the information out to our small businesses, work with them, see how we can provide opportunities for assistance. I don't know the answers, but I'm in the trenches with them, so we're going to get through this together. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council.
Thanks, Debbie. So now we'll be hearing from Phil Simpson. Are you trying to lift that podium up?
I am, sir. I see it. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, councilors, I really appreciate your attention today and allowing me to give my presentation.
I just need you to state your name.
I'm sorry. For the record, my name is Phil Simpson, Philip Simpson. Thank you. I think the council has kind of a difficult decision today, and I would characterize it as trying to balance the interests of the utility and the balance of the customers. Let me pull up my presentation. Let's see. Okay, thank you. So as Carrie mentioned, the Las Cruces Green Chamber of Commerce commissioned me to evaluate the proposed rate increase of $2.4 million. Following the recommendation of that report and consistent with the council's direction, the utility removed the debt for new gas line extensions from the rate increase. And I don't want to lose sight of that. I think that's a wonderful thing, and I appreciate the utility being willing to make that major decision to stop expansion of our gas system and stop having the customers pay extra for that. As Ms. Walsh mentioned, that the current rate request on the table is to increase revenue an additional $1.5 million a month. She called it $1.46 million. I rounded it a little bit. My issue is that, and the Green Chamber of Commerce issue and the Greater Chamber of Commerce issue is that that proposed increase still disproportionately impacts small commercial ratepayers. This is excessive, imbalanced, and unnecessary and violates accepted principles of utility rate design. So I'm going to focus on why this is imbalanced, and then a little bit on why I think the rate increase is unnecessary. There's a whole lot of commercial businesses that use gas in Las Cruces. As Ms. Walsh mentioned, the vast majority of those, more than 99%, fall into the small commercial rate class. Unfortunately, those small commercial rate customers will be hit with the biggest impact by far. It's over 33.3%. And small businesses really need to be protected against this unreasonable rate increase. So why do I say that it's unreasonable? So I want to talk a little bit about the rate allocation process. I think the important thing to understand here is that there are multiple, almost an infinite number of methods for allocating the revenue between rate classes. It's incorrect and misleading to say that one particular rate design, including this one, is scientifically correct, because there are so many options, there's so many judgment calls that get made during the rate allocation process, during the process of deciding who should pay what amount of the revenue increase. If this case were before the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission, this rate design would not fly. It would not go forward. I looked at 3 of the last Public Regulation Commission decisions. In all 3 of those decisions, the rates designs were done differently, but the commission, at the end of the process, adjusted those rates because they understood there's a lot of ambiguity, and as Mr. Rabin mentioned, commissions and council, you have the option of, I think you called it policy direction. Mr. Rabin called it policy direction. It's commonly referred to as the principle of gradualism, that you don't increase rates on a particular customer class much more than another particular customer class. And you do that to avoid rate shock. So again, the best practice is to increase rates gradually, and commissions, including the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission, they go to extreme measures to avoid rate shock to any particular customer class. So I'll switch now to the other issue. Is a rate increase really needed? The data I've looked at, which goes through the end of FY 2021, do not indicate a need for a rate increase. My report showed that the utility had ample financial reserves at the end of FY 2020, and that those reserves actually grew in 2021. And the next slide will cover that. I know the utility did not really appreciate that analysis and questioned the methodology. However, the methodology came from Mr. Rabin's report, and I noticed this morning that the methodology is also outlined in the last council resolution on rate setting. So the minimum funds balance are actually mentioned in there. After my slide that showed ample and growing reserves, the gas utility presented cash data, which I will, I have a table on that. So these numbers in the middle of the page are covered by that table probably better than here, so I'll go on to that. If you don't mind, let me grab some water. So this is the slide that the left 2/3 of the slide came straight out of my report, and the numbers came straight out of the New Gen report. And as you can see, at the end of FY 2020, there were about $3.1 million in excess reserves because the minimum balance, according to the 2 months rule that came up a little bit earlier, was 1.4 million. The utility had about 4.5 million, so the difference is 3.1 in excess reserves. And what was interesting is that those reserves appeared to grow significantly, more than doubled in FY 2021. The Capital Improvements Fund, there's no target, so there's no, I can't say these are excess, but it looks like at this point in time, there were significant excess funds. This doesn't quite match what Director Walsh was saying, so, and she may, of course she has more current information than I do, but according to these data at the end of 2021, there was very significant excess reserve funds in both the operating and the capital accounts. So in response to that slide, as I mentioned, the utility presented a slide at one of the utilities board meeting called a gas profit and loss slide, where they actually showed FY 2021 numbers. And this is an excerpt from that slide. I didn't want to try to show that whole table because it would have gotten way too small and hard to read. But what's significant about this slide is that the utility characterized it as showing a net loss of $2.75 million in FY 2021, the actuals column. But that really only occurs with the excessive non-recurring spending that occurred in FY 21. In FY 21, you may recall that the number of $923,000 is the number that needs to be spent on vehicle replacement. Well, in FY 2021, they spent quite a bit more than that. More significantly than that is the capital projects. The capital projects, the amount spent was about $3.7 million. And I don't think it was discussed this morning, but the long-term gas rehabilitation expenses is about $1 million a year. From FY 15 to FY 2020, the average was $989K a year. And in Mr. Rabin's rate review study, looking at what the requirements should be for the future, it was pegged at $1 million a year. And that's what this amount shows. So if you take that net revenue from FY 2021 and subtract off the vehicle and capital spending, you come out with a surplus of $328,000. So the reason I think this is important is that $1.46 million revenue increase was really based on a revenue requirements summary for a test year that was supposed to more or less match 2021. So we have data now in front of us that show what really happened in FY 2021, and that was a surplus. Now, that's not to say that expenses may increase in the future, but in FY 2021, there appeared to, the spending appeared to be excessive, and without that excessive spending, there would have been a surplus. Now, when I say excessive spending, let me qualify that a little bit, because, for example, the major equipment vehicle purchases, that is a number that varies quite a bit year to year. Some years you don't replace a lot of vehicles, some years you do, and this happened to be a year when a lot of vehicles were planned to be replaced. Mr. Rabin's report, I believe, predicted much more spending than this $1.3 million in 2021. But his report also did a long-term average, looked at kind of the average over 7 years, over 4 past and 3 future years. And that average is where that 923 came from. So I think we need to look at, the expenses going forward. So why, I think it's worth asking why we think that the prediction for FY 21 was wrong. Why were expenses lower? And I think one of the major things there, one of the major factors is personnel, and specifically salaries. You may recall seeing the slide that showed expenses, O&M expenses going from $10 million in 20 to $11 million in 2021. It turns out that didn't really happen. The expenses, O&M expenses stayed constant and even went down a little bit. We could bring up the whole table to see that, but basically the O&M expenses went down in 2021. That's not to say they may not go up in the future, but the data that I have indicate that there's no need for a rate increase. So what are the alternatives here for the council? The easiest thing to do is, if you think no rate revenue is needed, vote no, and no further action is needed until after we figure out what we need to spend on the energy transition plan and roadmap. If new revenue is justified, I think we need to apply the principle of gradualism to limit the maximum increase to 20%, for example. You could limit it to 10% on small commercial customers. And you could do it in a couple of ways. You could do it by shifting costs between rate classes. And in this case, what you would have to do is increase rates on residential customers very slightly to make a big rate decrease on small commercial. And that's not politically very popular to do that. So another option would be to just reduce the overall revenue increase by the same amount. Instead of shifting the revenue increase over to residential, just decrease the overall revenue increase. If you decrease it from 1.5 billion to 1.1, you could cap that small commercial rate increase at 20%. So this is the last slide of my main presentation. Actually, I have a whole lot of backup slides that I figured there probably wasn't time to get into the details, but we can do that if anybody has questions. I think you have that package in front of you. If you have any questions about that, I can answer them. But the recommendation of the Green Chamber of Commerce is that because the immediate need for new revenue has not been clearly demonstrated, don't approve the rate increase at this time. Use the current revenues to maintain the existing gas infrastructure for safe and reliable service. And we would say approve the decarbonization rider and start using it to cover the cost of the energy transition plan and roadmap. If you'll bear with me, I would like to address a couple of points that were made by Director Walsh. She talked about salary and benefits going from 2.44 million to 3.05 million. And I guess my question would be if that is a past or actual expense or a predicted expense, because it looks an awful lot like the 600K that I identified in my report as being associated with filling all the vacancies in the department, which is, I know Mr. Garcia has done a great job in filling vacancies, but it's virtually impossible to fill all vacancies. So when you fund the whole system, including all the vacancies, you're kind of funding more than is necessary. One of the other things that was mentioned was, we're going to go to electric vehicles, and an F-250 was depicted as going from 35K to 60K, and that was cited as a reason to increase rates. Well, I would note that's already built into that $923,000 for vehicle and equipment replacement. That analysis assumed that an electric vehicle costs double what is replaced. So if it goes from 35 to 60K, that's actually less than double. So that's a little bit of savings and not an increased cost. I also wanted to comment on the comparison with New Mexico Gas Company. I would note that New Mexico Gas Company is a for-profit corporation. They need to earn at least 10% more than a nonprofit municipal utility to pay their shareholders. So, and then when you look at it and you see that small businesses, a small business in Las Cruces is paying $414, where a small business in New Mexico Gas Company would pay, what was it, $277. In other words, Las Cruces small commercial customers are paying much more than a for-profit gas company. And I realize there's differences between the rate classes and the sizes of the rate classes, but it just seems exorbitant that the small businesses in Las Cruces should pay so much more than the small businesses in Albuquerque. And the residential rates are virtually the same, if you remember that graph. So again, I think there's some real adjustment that needs to happen to these rates. And I would be happy to work with the utility to come up with alternate methodologies for making these rate increases more equitable and not hurting our small businesses quite so much. If the council thinks that some revenue increase is necessary. But again, I think that is questionable. And I would also note that the council could, through policy direction, just choose another number instead of 1.46, cut that in half. It's a complicated process, but I think that in order to balance the interests of the community and the utility, we do need to make some adjustments to this proposal. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Councilor Beta.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Simpson, for the presentation. I actually have a clarification point that I need from Delilah, if that's all right first. Something that was mentioned by one of our speakers before was that there was no advisory group. However, I know that on our board, we do have a utility customer advisory group. It looks like it is active and has 5 members. They've met in November from what I'm seeing here. Is that a different function than what was talked about earlier, or is it the same thing?
It may have been intended to serve the same function, but it certainly did not. I attended several of those UCAG meetings, Utilities Customer Advisory Group meetings. And my recollection is that I was essentially convinced them that no rate increase was needed through a presentation similar to this one, but different. But they did not have any power to make that recommendation. In other words, from my perspective, I think that the former process may have been too litigious and too expensive, but there was, under that process, there was some balance. There was two sides to the process. There was some give and take. So I think that, to answer your question, no, the UCAG does not fulfill the process of the former, I think it was a rate setting advisory committee.
Okay, thank you. And if I may.
Yeah, sure.
And thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilor Beta, that's correct. When we changed the ordinance, it was the UCAG that stepped in to be the representation of public input. And so prior to that, there was an actual rate case process where you have a quasi-judicial process where there's arguments submitted and testimony and negotiations. And so the UCAG did serve it as that entity. And Mr. Simpson did just mention as when he presented his arguments to the UCAG, they were under consideration. Their recommendation came to the board to have that phased implementation. That was one of the big changes, as well as to remove the line extension. So they take all the customer input and then base their recommendation to the board on that.
So, okay, so that advisory board did make adjustments that we saw reflected here today?
Correct.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor Bencomo.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Simpson. I don't have any questions for you, actually. I just have a couple statements I want to make, but I did want to thank you and the folks who spoke on your advocacy and getting us here. I think that's incredibly important. I'm going to be really frank. I feel like we're now in a situation where, to Senator Hamlin's point on the small businesses, I do think about those small businesses all the time. Nessas and MROs and Le Rendezvous and Sassygrass, and I could name more and more and more, because to me, they're not just small businesses, they're families, right? So I do think about them all the time. And I feel like we're now in this position where if we approve a gas increase, it'll be seen as an anti-small business decision. And if we don't approve an increase, that's asking the people responsible for an entire utility to potentially put the gas utility in jeopardy, causing issues for thousands of Las Cruces and thousands of customers. And in an ideal world, we wouldn't need a gas utility. But the reality is that we're not there yet. We're not even close. And the fact is that the people who are going to carry the biggest burden of that are low to moderate income families, people who cannot afford, small businesses as well, who cannot afford to electrify. And I feel like that's been missing as part of this whole conversation, and we're not really taking their interest at heart here. And I really think it's important that we come to a middle ground, because so just for me, I would not support the residential class subsidizing for small business. And I do see the considerations here. That graph is really scary time for small businesses. It's been incredibly difficult for vulnerable families, for small business through this pandemic. So I really do hope that we're able to get to somewhere in the middle, Mr. Mayor. I don't know, beyond this work session, I don't necessarily have any other options here. I just really hope that if we don't feel comfortable with this option and this recommendation, that we come to meet somewhere in the middle, because I feel like that's what's clearly needed. An increase is clearly needed. How much? I think that's still, and who does it impact the most? I think that's still up for discussion. But I just wanted to note that, because, it's a tough decision. It's a tough place to be in up here, right? The shepherds of an entire gas utility, a public utility. That is a really hard place to be in. I am sure Delilah and Lucio have lost sleep over it. I'm certain of it. Just like I'm certain small businesses have lost sleep over how to pay their next monthly bill, right? And I think we can take all that into consideration and come up with a solution that maybe it doesn't work for either. Don't they say that that's the best solution, the one that doesn't work for anybody? But at the end of the day, Mayor, I just wanted to make that statement because I just felt like that really needed to be named. Thank you.
Councilor Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you for your presentation, Mr. Simpson. The one question I have for everybody up here is, aren't we in a mode to leave natural gas and to electrify? And if it's going to take at least 12 years to correct the problem we're in now, and we're looking at being climate change, on schedule. Well, that's beyond, 12 years would be 34. So then a year later, we'd be electrified. All of a sudden, we'd be green. So my question is this, we're moving towards electrification. My understanding is that any gas lines, any money that's being spent on natural gas is only for replacement lines, not for new development. So a lot of the presentation by Ms. Walsh, by Director Walsh, was based on of course, it took into account what exists in terms of, quote, the whole financial hole it's in, but prospectively in terms of new gas lines going in. So I'm opposing the rate increase on those grounds, to say nothing, of course, of the inequity. There is inequity when it comes to the smaller businesses, and I really want, Mr. Peely, this appeal is to you to have, in the future, to have all of our directors or any presentations made to the City Council to be consistent with what our policy is, and that's to be green as much as possible to electrify. So I want to thank you, Mr. Simpson, and thank Senator Hamblin for being here. And I appreciate your perspective, Mr. Simpson. And I think that if we're 11 years behind now and still swimming, I think that we can deal with alternatives and proceed according to our policy to electrify and go green, and not to put in new lines, gas lines, natural gas lines or otherwise. But thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Peely. Thank you, Ms. Walsh, and thank you, Mr. Simpson.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Flores, if I could address that, I do want to reiterate the gas rate review that we're proposing now does not include extension of the gas system. It's only to replace identified infrastructure. So we've already identified it's scheduled for replacement. So there is no expansion of the system included with this rate review.
Okay, well, and may I say something about that? My understanding is that our policy as a city is to electrify. And Larry Nichols, Director Nichols of Community Development, and some of his folks have spoken to that, and how, and people, maybe it's just my circle of friends, are talking about how to electrify. And it is very difficult. Some people who are like, the Tesla drivers and everything, solar panels, and are still finding it difficult to change their water heaters, get them. But I think that to support this today means that we're not really serious about electrification. And I feel very strongly about that. And thank you, Ms. Walsh. And thank you again, Mr. Mayor.
And Mr. Mayor, Councilor Flores, to speak to that, to the electrification of the city, that is something that's been called out in our climate action plan, which is why Resolution 153 is so important, the one that the council passed, which is energy transition. Put forth a plan so this happens and it's equitable. Because let's say you don't fund the system anymore and you don't want any more system growth, but you can't get certain parts of our city switched over to electric fast enough. Or what do we do? Are we just abandoning those customers and telling them, well, we can't repair it because eventually you won't need it again? And that's not, and I really admire what you put forth in Resolution 153, because you asked us that as a council. You said, we want to get a transition away from fossil fuels. We want to encourage lower carbon emissions in our city, but we also want to consider equity and impact to our citizens, and particularly to our low to moderate income citizens. And it actually calls that in the resolution, saying, do this responsibly. Because if I could turn off the switch tomorrow for fossil fuels, we'd all do that. Unfortunately, it's just not possible. There takes more infrastructure to be in place. There's a lot that has to be planned. Like you said, just simple upgrades to a home to have the right kind of power coming in order to electrify. That's necessary, and that doesn't exist in our lower income homes in the older parts of the neighborhood. And then regarding the equity comment, I do want to mention, Yes, this is a big change for the small commercial business class, but the equity or the inequity that exists is prior, if you don't change the structure, is your residents are supporting that. So you're telling your residential users, you're going to support, because if we don't change this and if we don't make the adjustments, that's exactly what happens, is our residential users will end up supporting the commercial class. And so I envy you on that decision, because it is difficult. It's very, you telling business owners, sorry, we're going to have to implement the rate. This is the cost of delivering the service to you. And unfortunately, that means they'll have to raise prices at one end. At some point, the citizens of Las Cruces have to pay for services. And it could be, my muffin costs a little bit more because of this, in order for the small businesses to survive. I don't know the answer to that. That's a completely different economic picture. But you're correct. It's a tough, tough position for all of you to be in.
Councilor Cran?
I just wanted to point out, I do think that it's important to include the decarbonization rider as a separate component of this rate review, I think, is part of the conversation. And I do think that's would be on the agenda when we consider this as part of a resolution, which I think is aimed at sort of what you're articulating in terms of those things. But I sort of just want to elevate Councilor Bencomo's comments. I think that there is kind of it is a shock to me. I understand rate shock is an official term, but 33% increase seems like a shock to me as someone who hasn't seen this inequitable distribution in the past, as being on city council and knowing that might have been part of the rate review 12 years ago or 11 years ago, whenever it happened. I would ask very strongly for a compromise position that reduces the rate increase and doesn't shift that burden to residential folks, but also doesn't disproportionately, or perhaps proportionally in an historical perspective, impact small businesses, especially at this time. I think, I know it's kicking the can, and I know that we do have to pay for services, but I really would like to see a reduced impact on those small businesses in the resolution that would come before us. So.
Councilor Beta?
Thank you, Mayor. I also believe that perhaps a compromise can be reached, but I am looking at kind of historically, since I've come on council, myself and Councilor Bencomo have seen these increases in different areas that have to come back to us. And what I keep hearing is that these things haven't been done in 10 years or 20 years. And so that tells me that we haven't had perhaps a system which is probably easier for the residents and customers and users to have gradual increases, so we're not going to these big extremes all the time, or it feels like that way. So looking forward, if we can have, perhaps some guides or guidance on like a 20-year or 30-year scope, and so that we're knowing what to do. I think that would be very helpful and good for businesses and residents to prepare for.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Beta, absolutely, and that's exactly why our board even said you have to start reviewing these every 4 years. You can't let it go. I know for those of you who were here when we had to increase the water rates so significantly, that was a tough decision. It was really, really difficult to put that on our system users, but we can finally invest in the system again because of that.
Yeah. Thank you. So delaying this, not doing any sort of increases, only extends what will have to be affixed later on. And we've had some significant changes, I know, within the budget from personnel, which was done rightfully so, for changes for insurance and making sure we're paying equitable wages. Plus, you have to fix a system. Those are costs that we can't get away from. And so we're going to have to budget for that. And so if we can find a compromise, perhaps in some way, but also look, and I think this will be our challenge, is to look really closely at those expenses and then recognize if we under budget and we have to do more emergency repairs, if we have to do different items like that, it will be more expensive for the user in the long run. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Simpson, for your presentation. I have a couple of questions for you, if you don't mind. Delilah, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Simpson, you spoke of the principle of gradualism, and and then this notion of rate shock, right? And earlier, I thought I heard that residents have more consumption, gas consumption. Is that, from your perspective and what you've seen, accurate than the small commercial?
They have more consumption as a class just because there's so many more of them. There's about 39,000 residential customers and about just over 3,000 commercial customers. So as a class, they have higher consumption. Per customer, the small commercial class has a higher consumption.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And so based on that and your expertise and experience going to these meetings, attending the board and such, and maybe this is, I'll also ask the same question to Delilah. I've done some research, and I just know just enough to be not very helpful, I'm sure. It's not my area. But I get the feeling that there's all these principles and theories related to a public utility, and when there's opportunity to, or because it's out of necessity to raise those rates, there's certain theories that are applied, and I'm not sure that that's what goes on at the utility board. Like, do they have, okay, these are our principles, we're going to stick with them? When we made that transition from the that quasi-operational component, I don't know that as a council, and I was here when Dr. Garcia presented that, I know that wasn't council's direction to them. These are the principles as policymakers we're going to utilize when it comes time for a rate increase. Now, from your perspective, are they operating under those certain principles? And I'm not aware.
Thank you, Councilor. I think that they don't have the resources to operate and apply all those principles. The Utilities Board had a work session and discussed this for, I think, 2 hours. I was allowed to speak for 10 minutes at that session. But in contrast, the El Paso Electric rate case, that went on for many months. There were literally thousands, if not tens of thousands, of pages of documentation that were prepared. There were 8 full days, I believe, of hearings before with different witnesses and lawyers before the hearing examiner. And then she had, I think, about 6 weeks to write her recommended decision, taking everybody's written and oral testimony into account. And she certainly had the resources and the time to apply rate-making principles because they were described to her very extensively, and she has experience in that realm. But the Utilities Board did not have that same level of experience and not that same level of information, and certainly not the same level of balanced information from different sources where the revenue requirements, for example, are able to be questioned and the assumptions challenged and numbers adjusted accordingly.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem. And that really does outline the difference. When it comes to the process and what we do, we follow the ordinance passed by the City Council, and that's where we start. And so this process started back in 2016, making those adjustments from that quasi-judicial process to what we do today, which is just identifying the cost of service to each rate class and then applying that rate to them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Delilah. I appreciate that. and some of the questions I asked earlier were, Mr. Simpson, from these areas that that utilities is indicating need rehabilitation or maintenance, probably more rehab because they're lower pressure. From your perspective as a utility expert, do we have the funding available for that?
Well, it appears that we do. I mean, the data that I've seen is from FY20 and FY2021, and that data indicate that there is surplus revenue and surplus reserves. Director Walsh gave some numbers verbally that indicated that there were not very large reserves. But without seeing those in the context of budgets and comparing expenses and revenues, it's hard to evaluate anything other than having the complete context and the picture of the whole years of expenditures.
Thank you for that.
Can I address your earlier questions about principles, about rate-making principles? As I mentioned, I referred to earlier, there's really no scientifically correct way of allocating rates, and that's because there are a lot of principles that are sometimes contradictory, and there's good reasons for thinking about things one way or another. In this case, what the utility did and what Mr. Rabin's company did was assume that all the expenses for distribution were based on demand. And that's not really a common way of allocating the rates. In my NMSU class, we did 4 different allocation methods for distribution costs, and 100% demand was not one of them. New Mexico Gas Company, they allocated 39% to customer and 61% to demand. So that's not the way they did their design either. So what I'm suggesting, when we talk about small business customers being subsidized by somebody else, that's really only if you take this one particular narrow interpretation and methodology of allocating rates. So it's really kind of a stretch to say that small businesses have been subsidized by anybody else in the past. I think that's also why, if you look at the rates, the current rates, small businesses pay quite a bit less than residential, and then in the future rates under this proposal, their rates go up. It's quite a bit more than $1 a decatherm, while residential rates stay the same. So that's sort of hard to digest that, and my contention is it's really kind of due to a sort of somewhat arbitrary rate design. And again, I think that needs to be fixed, whether that's through a totally different allocation or perhaps an adjustment that just sort of, chops off the top of that expensive rate increase on small businesses.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. This is really tough. This is hard, and I can appreciate everybody's feedback here on council and what I've read and the presentations. We talk a lot about equity here, and I know that a good portion of our community are in poverty, and this is going to, I certainly don't want the majority of this rate increase to hit our residents nor our small business, but I don't know that they're not the same, right? There's apple and oranges, and so some of the slides are confusing because there's all this other stuff, just like you've mentioned, right? And I hope that's not by design, but I certainly am very concerned about when I hear things like low pressure, especially in areas, I love, Mr. Garcia, when you said one customer is too much when you don't get the service that you need. Absolutely, I agree with that. But I also feel like council is given a mandate, and I feel about our climate reform and things of that nature, that I feel like I'm really wanting more information. I really feel like we need the energy transition plan before we make a decision. And I think if we could get that within the next 18 months, I don't know how feasible that is, but that's sort of where I'm leaning before we make a decision like this. And I agree that if that's something that we can work on, but also compromise, and your number 2 slide, Mr. Simpson, is something that we might consider. And that's sort of where I'm headed, frankly. So thank you, Mayor.
Okay, so let me just ask a couple questions, probably of you or Delilah. So I can't remember when it was. I know it was scheduled for EFO, Delilah, yourself, and me. We had a Zoom, but was that the ending of the year or beginning of this year?
I believe that was the end of September.
Was it that long? Okay. So there, I don't think so. I don't know, but there was a document that was given. I think you gave it to the Utilities Board, and it was dated on 11/15/2021. And in there, you had gas development, line extension, and you had a lot of money. And I appreciate you taking it out, because that's what the brunt of our conversation was. And I think that's what council's talking about. But can you recall what percent you were asking for back then? Was it the same as it is now? No? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I believe those expenses have been removed, so the percentage increase went from 22% down to like 14 overall revenue.
Well, no, I'm talking about the rate increase.
Yes, sir. The rate increase is a little harder to, it sort of depends on how you look at it and what you include, whether you're looking at monthly bill impact, but in terms of the overall revenue, the overall rate, the overall revenue increase, which equates to overall rate increase, was 22%, and now it's like 14. It has been reduced because of the gas line extensions.
Do you concur with that?
Mr. Mayor, yes, sir. I believe the small commercial at the time was close to almost a 40% increase recommendation, and it's dropped down. 45? Yeah, it was 40, 45%. That would have been the rate recommendation had we kept all those extensions in. However, we did remove that.
Right, okay, so it was 40 to 45. See, I couldn't find that. I found the documents you're talking about, but I couldn't remember on this other handout that we had, because it was dated on 11/15, so our meeting had to have taken place after that. It couldn't have taken before that.
Yes, sir, you're right. I'm not sure what I'm recollecting. And the number was 42.7%. Average bill impact on small commercial, and now it's 33.
And that was what you were wanting to be phased in over 3 years at that time. So, okay, so, and now you're requesting 30%.
Mr. Mayor, that's correct. Over a 3-year time period.
Over a 3-year time period. Okay, so that's what I wanted to clarify, because I was looking at the paper, the documents that was sent, and it was sent by Christine and not by you. And so I'm sorry about that. So if I was able to find that there. So I'm looking at it, and yes, you're right. There is no gas extension, so that's good. And I think after listening to my colleagues here, so you're saying the model that you have presented is based on 30%. There's nothing that shows what it would look like if we were to do, I don't know, 21%, which is basically 7% each year. That's not feasible.
Mr. Mayor, it's something that we could present to you if you want us to do those calculations on what the revenue would generate.
Well, I think what I'm hearing, well, at least that's what I thought I heard from my colleagues, is that I think they recognize the need, and I think you've clarified that there are no gas extensions, which is good. I think, Mr. Simpson, this is yours right here, right? Where it says maximum rate increase to 20%, or who wrote this right here? This alternatives for consideration.
Yes, sir, that was my sort of a compromise proposal.
Right. And so I just rounded it up to 1%, so it makes it even 7% each year instead of 10%. So that's 9% less than what is being asked for by utilities, and it's close enough to what you had suggested. And I don't know if it's something that my colleagues would support, but I think if that's kind of a compromise. It's not, like Councilor Bencomo said, it's not like exactly what you wanted, it's not exactly what we wanted, but it's somewhere in the middle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I would like the opportunity to respond to Mr. Simpson's report once we have a chance.
Please. Mm-hmm.
So Grant Rabin with Nugent Strategies and Solutions again. First of all, just a few comments on the discussion that's taken part so far. Just for clarity, the roughly 30% increase that we're talking about for small commercial is not a 30% increase in the bill. We're talking about a subset of the bill that is the base rate portion. It doesn't include the gas commodity, which is, a big portion of the overall bill. So the bill that the customer receives is not going to go up by that percent. A portion of the bill is going to go up by that percentage under the proposal. So important to keep in mind for context. And just a few notes, I know there were some questions raised about what a commission might do. In my experience, commissions rely heavily on cost of service as a guiding principle, amongst other considerations, but driving to cost of service is often one of the major guideposts they use for decision making. I'll also say that it is substantially more common for a municipally owned utility to endeavor to use a process like what we have used here, or something even perhaps less formal than this, to review utility rates. I only know of one other utility in the country that uses the quasi-judicial system that you guys had previously used 10 or so years ago. That is very uncommon in the industry, in my experience. Simpson did comment on the financial health of the utility, and I guess some of his comments on the reserve balances, I think, are influenced by an accounting number versus a cash number. I think Ms. Walsh can tell you what the cash balance available to the utility is currently at this time. It looks very different than what the accounting basis numbers that were previously being looked at on the slide. Another thing that is important to keep in mind, Mr. Simpson did rightly point out, what happened in fiscal year 2021 compared to revenues. Critically, from my perspective, is the question of whether or not the spending in fiscal year 2021 was sustainable for the utility. And Ms. Walsh has made a contention that it's not sustainable. I know that they were needed to reduce funding or spending in order to right-size their spending to the revenues that were coming in. That level of spending is not sustainable to keep the utility operating in a safe and efficient manner. Even if there is going to be a time when the gas utility is turned off, that time is not tomorrow. And between now and then, you have to be able to provide safe, reliable service to these customers. And that requires you to be able to make these investments into the utility on an annual basis and not defer maintenance and investments in the system because the funding is not there. You won't be able to make it to that eventual end state in a safe, reliable manner unless you maintain the utility appropriately with what you have. And I'm very concerned that a decision to mitigate what has already been a reduced request from the utility is going to threaten the ability of the utility to be able to maintain that system in a safe and reliable manner as you transition to whatever your end state would be. Mr. Simpson did make an observation about the methodology not being set in stone, or there being one particular method utilized for developing cost of service. And that is true. There is more than one way to develop cost of service. In my experience, the reason that some of the other methodologies are used, like minimum system or some others that might be endeavored to do, is sometimes in recognition of lack of data available to be able to make the proper analysis and to utilize those other alternatives. The methodology that we employed to be able to assess the cost of service for this utility in this process was predicated upon the cost of designing and operating the system to meet the peak demands in the winter months for all the gas customers. That's the cost. The utilities represented to me on many occasions in many different ways that they are operating and investing in the system to be able to meet the peak demand in the winter months. So we're assigning costs to customers based on that peak demand. That is connecting cost causation with cost allocation, and in my opinion is the most appropriate way for us to be able to develop the cost of service. Mr. Simpson did rightly point out the concerns over rate shock. And so that it is certainly true that you need to be concerned about rate shock and the gradualism of increasing rates. However, the utility has already allowed for a gradual plan of increasing rates gradually over 3 years instead of all at once. It's going to happen after the $1.69 per decatherm surcharge that customers are paying right now goes away. So even at the eventual state, I would suggest that most customers are going to see a decrease in their bill compared to what they're paying today on that gas bill. So the arguments about gradualism fall a little flat for me in recognition of the 3-year phase-in and the fact that they're paying higher bills now than what they would be paying under our proposal. So I think at the end of the day, the governing board of the utility needs to make a determination about whether or not they are going to charge what is the identified cost of service to each customer class. And it is a policy decision for you guys to make. And there is certainly a recognition of gradualism and a pathway to get there eventually, not all at once, all today. But if you're not going to eventually get these customer classes to cost of service, which part of the reason why small commercial has such a big distance to go right now is they're so far from cost of service to begin with. If you're not going to eventually move them to cost of service, in my opinion, you need to make a policy decision that says, we're not going to put you all the way to cost of service for various policy reasons, and we identify where's the funding going to come from to make up the shortfall. So it is, in my view, completely acceptable for you guys as a body in your purview to make a decision to not take customers all the way to cost of service, but in my view, it's also incumbent upon you in that eventuality to identify who's going to pay more in order to accommodate that policy decision. And my last comment is, I think Mr. Simpson made a comment about arbitrary nature of the rate design. And I would suggest to you that the most arbitrary of rate designs is the one that's not tethered in some way to cost of service. The cost of what it provides, the cost of what it costs the utility to provide service should be the guidepost by which you can determine what you should be charging customers. And so to not be connected or aligned with cost of service would be, in my view, be the most arbitrary rate design of all.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So let me just share with you some comments that, I was reserving for a bit until I could clarify whether or not, and I appreciate staff and Delilah to verify that there was no gas line extensions. So when I first came on board to the city back in early 2001, the city was in partnership with a company. Well, we had a company, actually. Believe it or not, we had a partnership with the city of Hatch. It's called the Rio Grande Natural Gas Association. And what's interesting about that is the board, much like many of you sit on and many that we appoint, This board was paid. The chairman got $750 a month, I think, and the other members got $250 a month. Imagine, in 2001. Needless to say, it was a very popular board. Yeah, who wanted to be on that board? And so, one of the things that we have to do, I mean, even though I appoint my colleagues to this Utilities Commission, I always tell them, you know what, it's probably going to be, you're going to probably be here for at least your term because it's very technical. And this is our, other than Councilor Bencomo and I think a beta that sit on there, maybe one more, this is our only time to question. And I know there's, perhaps it may be redundant, but I mean, we have to do our best to look out for the ratepayer, the taxpayer and the resident. But what I was going to tell you was the reason why we split with the town of Hatch is because Dr. Garcia said, you know what, we're going to have to do some upgrades. We're going to have to do some serious upgrades to this gas system that we have, and Hatch didn't want to do it. So we ended up, that's when we divided it. They took their portion, we took our portion, we did our best, and we took a lot of different, we tried to keep it obviously close to Las Cruces, and they kept it close to Hatch. And then about a year or two later, they sold it to a private company, and guess what they did? They had to raise rates because they had to redo the rehab on those lines. So one of the things that we're very fortunate of, and we have to rely on our staff, they're the professionals at it. We get a chance to question as much as we can and see if they, eventually say, but they didn't. They kept steady at this. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't want us to have, and I'm sure you've seen this back east, and it happens a lot back east, all of a sudden a house blows up. It's because of the lines are old. And we're fortunate that we don't have that, and I don't want to have that, and we can't have that. And so we need to that's why they elect us. We have to make the hard choices. But I would like, with your concurrence, is that staff bring back two proposals, one at 21% and one at 30%, and then let us see how it looks and just go from there. And you bring back, please, the actual mechanism, how it's going to look with both increases. And then also, I guess, and I'm glad you clarified this, sir. Again, I took it the impression that it was going to go up by that much. If you're saying that it's actually going to be less, let's call that the street rate, okay? Please include the street rate, what it's going to be when it hits the street, as opposed to what the increase is and maybe in the price of gas, if you could do that. And then that allows us, council, to at least have more of an opportunity to digest it and make the appropriate support or not. Good. Councilor Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe, if I understand what you're saying, is Mr. Raven indicated that only that 30% only increase only applied to a certain line item on the bill, for lack of a better word. Is that what you're referring to, Mr. Mayor?
Well, that was my understanding. It was an increase over a period of 3 years, 10%
yes,
each year.
Over a period of 3 years, and it's not the entire bill that's 30%.
That's correct. So we are talking about the base rate portion of the bill, which is the access charge and the volume charge, that does not include the cost of the actual gas that you're being supplied. And so we're talking about a portion of the bill overall that will increase over 3 years by 30%, and will, at the end of that increase, likely be less than what the bill is today because of the removal of the surcharge that's currently being charged to customers.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Mr. Raven. And I think what the mayor is asking for is that we get presented with a sample of what a bill would look like. And I think also a sampling perhaps of what a small business would be facing, what a community, a home user in a lower economic area, and say someone living in $1 million house or $500,000 house in Sonoma Ranch would be paying, to see what the equity or inequity would be. Things like that, I think that we just want to make sure that everyone's going to, if we're going to be having a rate increase, let's make it equitable. And that's, I think, the information we would need before we could proceed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Raven.
Thank you, Councilor. So if that is meets with your support, then I think that's what we should just have them bring back. Yeah. Well, we can't vote, but I think I can see the heads nodding yes. Okay. Anything else? I appreciate, Mr. Simpson, as a member of the public, I know this interests you, and I appreciate you and what you're doing to try to help and provide assistance to us. One of the reasons why I supported years ago, believe it or not, we used to have to do this, and that's when Dr. Garcia said, well, let's go to this other model here so that we appoint some council members so that they can get that technical knowledge so that, you hear it and then bring it back to council instead of us spending, we haven't spent all day, but, spending all day questioning why we should do this or not. But, and we do have, well, I know I see one of the commissioners here, we do have members of the public, they're not connected. They do have some, they have to have some technical knowledge to sit on that board, and we appreciate Mr. Little as well as others that volunteer their service to the city to help protect the ratepayer. You were going to say something, Mr. Simpson?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I did not want to sit down without thanking you and the council for your attention and your forbearance in listening to me. Mr. Mayor, though, I would like to ask a kind of a clarification question about your proposal. So I think you're referring to the average small commercial bill impact of 33.3% after 3 years, correct? And you're suggesting that instead of 10 or 11% a year, that rate increase be 7%. So in other words, at the end of that, the small commercial customers would see a 21% overall rate increase. So in other words, their overall rates are not going up as much after 3 years.
That's correct, but, and I'm sorry, sir, what is your last name again? Raven. Raven. So Mr. Raven, AKA Houdini, I want to see how it goes down if we were to do the increase, because that's an incredible, that's almost like, why would we not support that if it's going to go down? If we, that's why I want to see that. But that's why I was asking if you could bring both models to us. But yes, you're absolutely right. That's what I'm thinking. Because worst case scenario, we appreciate our small businesses so much, but everything relative, the residents, they don't have that ability, if they needed to pass that increase on. Businesses do, and I'm not saying that they need to. I'm just saying if everything equal, that's why we have to do our best to protect the residential. And if we can take a look at the plan for the small business, okay? But again, I still got to see where, if we were to move this, why wouldn't we do this if it means that it goes down? You know what I'm saying? So that is, I'm looking forward to that presentation.
Yes, sir. I think, well, maybe Delilah wants to clarify that for you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Mr. Mayor, moving forward, the bottom line is we need 1.46 million. So that's the bottom line. If you don't want to have the small business experience a 30% increase and would prefer a 21% increase, then the direction I need from you is where do I get the rest of the money? So there's no.
Excuse me, how much is the rest of the money? What is the difference?
Oh, I don't know what that dollar amount is. I'll have to look at, but I need to know where to get the rest of the 1.46 million, because if we don't increase by the 30% recommended rate and we maybe do 20% or 21% to the small business rate class, I still need to recover the difference from a different rate class. And so that's the direction I would need.
Okay, so just roughly, that would bring in 2/3 of this, give or take. Of the 1.46 million, because if you're saying that the 33% brings in 1.46 million, then
Grant Raven with Nugent. I don't know what the number is, because it also, there's other customer classes besides small commercial that are experiencing rate adjustments. So on balance, I'm not sure what proportion is coming from the small commercial class compared to the rest. I mean, I guess my suggestion is that, as Ms. Walsh has pointed out, the revenue requirement itself, in terms of what is identified as being necessary to keep the utility operating in good working condition and repaired and in good operations, it requires at least this 1.46, arguably more because we're 2 years behind, but at least that much. And so if we're going to as a policy decision, not recover some portion, which I can identify what the math says the dollar amount is, but whatever that dollar amount is, if we're not going to recover from small commercial, as a policy, where should we look to recover that from other customers?
No, I hear you. I understand what you're saying. I just wanted to know what amount you're talking about, and I just did a real quick math, and so I'm looking at roughly you'd be out about 500,000, give or take. So, then that's why if you have a chance when you bring it back to council, we can make the decision if do we move forward with what you proposed. But so, Mr. Raven, help me understand how, if we were to pass this, it would actually be cheaper. And maybe you already talked about
so I think when the cheaper part is you're currently assessing $1.69 per decatherm to all customers across the entire system to recover the unusual cost of gas during Winter Storm Uri last February, 1 year ago. That is projected to eventually be paid off this summer. And we, as part of the accommodations to the rate proposal, it was decided that if these rates were adopted, they would not start increasing these rates until after that fee had gone away. So the mere fact that that fee goes away is going to overshadow the amount of this increase that we're proposing that's going to be increased over 3 years. So at the end of the 3 years, when you get to the ultimate rate proposal, it would still be less of a bill impact than what they're seeing today because of the $1.69 per decatherm fee that is on everyone's bill that will be going away this summer.
Okay, well, I think one of the council members suggested that you bring an actual bill. And I see what you're saying. It's much like our GO bond. After we pay it off, we can go out there again, and it's not going to increase because it's already been, but it's already in the amount that's being taxed. So I see what you're saying now. Now I understand. I was thinking, how can you do that? But okay, so if you can bring those back, that would be beneficial because I think that would be very helpful. And worst case scenario, you never know. Council could decide to pluck that 500,000 somewhere from someplace just for this 1 year. I mean, right now there's just so much being hit by not just regular, residents, but businesses alike. From I was just noticing just the other day, their cost of to repair your shoes went up because of everything. It's just going, and it just keep compounding it. So if we were to hypothetically make up that first 1 year increase of the $500,000, and then, but let's just see how it looks. Let's just, when we can see it and understand it, makes things a lot better. Since we're all public officials, pull up one of our own utility bill and have it there. That way there you can use one of ours. Yeah, show it. Yeah. That way there we can take a look at it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councilors. And as I mentioned before, there is no easy answer. It does cost more to do business. Our goal, of course, is to be as efficient as possible, and we'll keep working to that end. But at the end of the day, it takes money for us to maintain everything in the city. And I know, councilors, you've all seen this over and over and over again when we come back to you for change orders because equipment went up. I'll give you an example. Mr. Simpson was talking about trucks. Trucks are so expensive right now just because of the costs and the demand right now. Even in solid waste, I had to order a chassis last December to get it delivered for next year. And I had to make that commitment to the purchase because of the demand and the fact that we had to do an adjustment, we had to change our quotes, and that's just the reality of everything that we're doing today.
Understood. Yeah, I just, and again, I appreciate you making sure that the gas line extensions were removed, so that's good. Okay, so thank you very much, for everyone. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your time and all the effort you put in, Mr. Simpson. We appreciate it. Okay. All right, so next item is going to be the GeoBond quarterly update. Mr. David Cedillo and Tony Trevino, or it looks like he's coming. He's just there for moral support. Okay.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. David Cedillo, Public Works Director, and I will be going over the GoBond program update for you today. We start off with the Hadley Recreation Complex. As we let the council know at the last quarterly meeting, this part of question 1 completed early. You will see that that did finish in quarter 3 of 2021. We wanted to share these wonderful pictures of those improvements to all those facilities there, but more importantly also report on the contract amount, which was $3,759,000, 226, and of that, all of it was spent for this portion of question 1. Also a part of question 1 is the park and sports courts. This project started in October of 2020. We're at about 89% complete. It is scheduled to be completed in April. So we do have one item remaining, and that is some erosion improvements out by the big pavilion out at Young Park. If you look at the photos that we have here, there is erosion coming down from that pavilion onto the trail and then down on into the pond. That's the only item that remains. Once that is completed, the project will be done. I will want to note that this work will not take place until after spring break. The reason for that is Parks and Rec does have some activities scheduled for that large pavilion, so we didn't want to impact those activities. We want to have them perform, do whatever they need to do that they have scheduled, and then we will move forward with the construction. Again, as a reminder, the parks that have been completed under this question are Hillrise, Lyons, Papin, Apodaca, Benavides, Metro Verde, Cardon, and Klein. So now we do want to move into that portion that we do report on with percent billings and time, and also what was planned and what actual costs are. Those are the two graphs that council is most familiar with and we've been seeing. However, we did add, based on recommendations, were to come back and say what are those costs and what have been spent to date. I will point out at the top, you will see that bar graph or that chart that shows that this is scheduled to be completed in quarter 2 of this year, 2022. At this point, that contract amount is $1,826,322. Of that spent to date is $1,630,852. The chart on the left is simply showing the amount spent. So as far as billing goes, we're at 89% billed with an 85% time on the contract itself. The graph to the right, you will see the red line are actuals, the blue are the projected from before we started the projects, and you will see that that line is steady, the red line. That is because we've been working on the design and cost for that erosion work out at Young Park. Next, we have Unidad Park. This project did start construction on January 12th. We're 43% complete, and I will detail a little bit more on the next slide about that 43%. We have an estimated completion date of July 5th of this year. As you can see, some of those pictures right there are a little heartbreaking, but we do want to focus that this will be a new and improved park for our community. You will see that the wood structure and concrete footings have been demolished, and they're also proceeding with earthwork and utilities as we go through there as well. Again, you'll notice up at the top the bar chart for the completion that is scheduled to be completed in this year, quarter 3, just into quarter 3 in July. On the left again, you will see those billings versus time, and on the right, the projections. Now, I do want to speak a little bit to how those percentages are high. Those are based on purchases that the city has made for the project. So, since the city has already purchased the playground equipment and the splash pad equipment, that has elevated the dollars spent on that contract. Hence, 43% of the billings for that as we go through. Up top, you will see the contracted amount is $1,844,412. Of that, spent to date, $785,000. Next project in question 1, we have the East Mesa Public Rec Complex. This was approved January 12th. The estimated completion date is December 31st as we move forward. We did have a groundbreaking ceremony this month on the 15th, and thank you for those who attended. A little windy that day, but overall a well-attended groundbreaking ceremony. The contractor will be working on clearing and grubbing the site this week. Now, I do want to note, we didn't have any pictures, obviously, because they'll be beginning work this week, but we did want to incorporate some of the work that the same contractor who was awarded the road project that leads to the park on Sonora Springs, we did want to show some progress on that as well, too. Lastly, we have the dog parks in question 1. I do want to remind council that we did decide to incorporate the dog parks with the construction of the Animal Services Center. Now, that doesn't mean that the funds are coming in from anywhere else. They're coming from question 1. It was just going to be more efficient to have those included with that project to move it forward. So you will see a little bit of information from this slide to the next. The project started in June of last year, and we have an estimated completion date of September this year. For the dog park at Rinconada, we're nearly complete with the earthwork. The curb and gutter is complete for the parking area, and they're installing fencing. For Burn Lake, we're nearly complete with the earthwork as well at 95%. Sidewalks and fencing are being installed along with utilities. As mentioned before, you're going to have the same timelines with the Animal Services Center for question 2 as the dog parks since they were combined. The project overall is 44% complete. You can see the items that we have completed through there. I do want to point out that we do have the exterior wall framing, which is 100% complete, and then you can see the structural members at 70%, which you can see the bar joists going across for the roof supports. Also, we have the structure for the main entrance there as well. Along with that, the dog pods are continuing work with the CMU or a cement mortar unit. Those are more commonly known as cinder block. And also you'll see in the top left corner, work continues with electrical, plumbing, and other interior framing. Again, we have your graphs for both billing and time and what that is projected. The graph on the right, you will notice that the actuals are a little bit lower than what was projected. As we continue to move forward with construction, you will see that gap close as we near completion of that projected item. The contract amount for both of these projects, again, these are combined, is $9,920,440. Spent to date is $4,386,585. Fire station number 3. We do have 97% completion. Our original completion date for this project was January 20th. We do have a revised date, and I'll explain that here in a little bit more in detail. The project, however, did reach a temporary certificate of occupancy on January 11th. Since then, a walkthrough and a punch list has been done for the project. Also, the general contractor has trained city staff on some of those items that they have in the building. Now, some of those items that are remaining and why that was extended out till the end of March. The gate operation installation, that was actually recently completed by the time the presentation was done. But we do have delays. We have delays in door hardware and some security items such as cameras. That is for your access control and video security. As mentioned in the discussion just a while ago, not only cost, but we are also experiencing delays with deliveries of materials. That is the cause for this. This was outside the contractor's realm. They didn't have no control over this. But again, they did meet the obligation of getting substantial completion and have a temporary CO. Another item that we do have is the photovoltaic array connection. That has to be done by El Paso Electric. That has been scheduled, and they should be getting that done before the end of March. And then lastly, we have some landscape items. Did want to share some very nice pictures of that facility itself. You will see over on the left, which is going to be on the east side of the building, or basically the rear of the building as it goes through that area that's going to be accessible to the fire department. In the middle, you can see the front entrance to the building itself. That pond that you see out down towards the bottom, that's some areas that'll have some landscaping that'll come in with some plantings. When this picture was taken, they do already have some rock landscaping in there as well. And then over to the right, you can see the beautiful finishes of the interior of the building. Again, wanted to show you those graphs with billing and then those projections of actuals to proposed. Very close. We are, as noted, 97% complete with the billings. The 86% that you see there is the adjusted for the end of March. The contract amount for this is $5,110,626. Of that, $4,947,955 has been spent. Our last project that we have here is the walking, jogging, biking trails for question 4. That project began in April of last year, 95% complete, and they are estimated to be completed by the end of April. Again, quarter 2 of this year on that bar graph up above. So for this, the Mesilla Drain has reached substantial completion, and a punch list and walkthrough of the improvements has been done. That was as of January 6th. The Las Cruces and Armijo Drainage Trail, those continue to have signage installed, bike lanes, and crosswalk markings installations. Once they complete those, we'll reach substantial completion and then go through a walkthrough. Again, I do want to point out the graphs that council is familiar with. I do want to highlight this project from the billing standpoint has been ahead of those projected all along. It looks like we may be able to finish early, but again, we'll see how the work continues. To date, the contract for that is $2,290,792. Of that, we've spent $2,179,356. Going over the program budget, here is all of those costs that were reported on that, based from in detail for each question. Again, this slide, you will remember, multiple projects are under question 1, and then we have question 2, 3, and 4 that are listed there. I do want to note that council did approve ARPA funding in the amount of $4.1 million. That was approved last August. At this point, no ARPA funding has been spent, although as those dollars get spent, they will be included in the quarterly report. Lastly, just another look of compiling all of those project schedules with their end date and where they're at this point in time. And then the last 2 slides broke it down for the overall. Again, this is the actuals to proposed based on all of the billings that have happened on all of the projects and what was estimated. As you can see, they're a little bit low at this point in time right now, but as we move forward with some of the larger projects, expenses such as finishing out the Animal Service Center and the East Mesa Public Rec, we will start to see that gap close. This last graph basically just shows the exact same thing. We're at 60% spent at this time. Time-wise, about 77% spent overall. With that, both I and staff are available for any questions that you may have.
Thanks, David. Councilor Flores?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Cedillo. My concern is that we're overall about 77% done with most of our projects. And do we have all our materials already purchased for those projects? Because I know that early on, a lot of those had to be adjusted, like the design of the Animal Service Center had to be changed because of the price in materials. So are we in a position where we still might be facing skyrocketing prices in lumber or whatever materials?
Mayor, Councilor Flores, great question. An example, obviously, we've already purchased the equipment for Unidad Park, which is both the splash pad and the playground. We did recognize those items, right? So we wanted to move early on those. The only thing that may impact as we move forward is the equipment for the East Mesa Public Rec with the park. However, we are looking into those items and seeing what we can do to get ahead of those costs. As far as those prices skyrocketing, again, we're not seeing much relief from a lot of material costs. Now we're obviously seeing a lot of delivery delays, but we're working to minimize those impacts.
And in the event that the amount of the money that still remains, each project had an allocation of funds. Say, for example, one of the projects has doesn't spend all of its money for whatever reason, and another project falls short. Can those funds be transferred or no?
Mayor, Councilor Flores, yes. For those projects that are encompassed with question 1, those funds can revert back from project to project. However, for the funds that were specifically approved for questions 2, 3, and 4, those need to remain with that project.
Okay. Then my next question is in the fire station number 3, I didn't see that tall wall where the art project would be going up, the public art. Maybe the sketches were different, or maybe it made the building look taller, and the reality is, or was the building actually redesigned as was the Animal Service Center building?
Mayor, Councilor Flores, Tony has a little bit more information on the art piece itself, so I'm going to let him answer that.
Great. So it's his fault. I knew it, Tony. I knew it. Thank you.
We have to spread the love.
Thank you.
Just for that, let me raise this a little bit. Mayor, Councilor Flores, good afternoon. Tony Trevino for the record. No, that middle piece that you were referring to is there. Let me come back to here. I think since these are just actual photos, we didn't really get a good photo of the front. But if you can see where my mouse is, that portion is that tower area that the art piece will go around. And I know staff is working with the art board to get that installed here shortly.
Great. And then the artwork will be going up as soon as everything's done? Or más o menos?
Mayor, Councilor Flores, as soon as that art piece is ready to go, we'll be installed for that. So there is no waiting on whether the project is open to public or anything else. It's just as soon as that piece is ready, we will get it installed.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Cedillo, and thank you, Mr. Trevino.
Real quick, before I get to Councilor Bencomo, who was the contractor on this? They put it up pretty quick. Looks real nice.
Mayor, this is Jane's
Jane's
Corporation, who is also doing the Animal Service Center for us.
Well, they did our city hall, they did our aquatic center, convention center.
Yes, sir.
Councilor Bencomo, Councilor Beta.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, gentlemen, for the presentation. Yes, I couldn't agree more. This is gorgeous. My only question is there a possibility that the ARPA funds allocated for some of these projects will not be used?
Mayor, Councilor Bencomo, no, I believe all the funds for the ARPA will be utilized.
Okay.
I don't think we're going to have an issue with that.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Beta.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Cedillo. As we are looking into going into our potentially our next bond cycle, I was curious if we're going to have these types of slides available at those public meetings that will be coming up soon, so that we can share with the public that we're, in many of these cases, really ahead of schedule and kind of what their dollars have been going towards.
Mayor, Councilor Beta, yes, ma'am, we can definitely provide some of these slides as we move through that process.
Okay, great, thank you. I think actually that would be really helpful if we're asking them to reallocate that funding, that we're showing them what it went for. And then, yeah, I think that's it, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, David and Tony, for the presentation. Can you refresh my memory specifically to the Apodaca Park work, what the money went through in total?
Mayor Pro Tem, yes, the scope of work that was allocated for Apodaca Park included the expansion on 2 sides. It included repairing the court surface as it was, and then applying 3 layers of coating, colored, to meet the actual court sizes per specifications of the U.S. Pickleball Court Association. It also included improvements of the wind fence all the way around out there, the relocation of some lights that were on the park with the extension of the concrete to the east and west. And we also had improvements to interior fence in between the courts as well too. That was on the court itself, so there were a couple of improvements off-site, and that was to provide a simple shade structure over some equipment adjacent to the court.
Say that last part again, David, I didn't hear you.
Yes, there was a small structure, a shade structure, that was installed over some existing equipment adjacent to the court.
The playground?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And what's the total?
The total amount for that project itself, I don't have that in front of me, but I can get that over to you, unless Tony has a dollar amount, because it was incorporated with the whole parks.
Thing,
yes,
right.
ma'am.
I just, if you could do that, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, looks like everyone's had their questions answered, so good job. I still appreciate you all working through, especially March 2020, you know, COVID. I mean, goodness, you guys just kept working, so it's coming along good. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Council.
Okay, if there's nothing further, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Gandara.
Second by Flores.
Okay, motion made by Mayor Pro Tem Gandara, second by Councilor Flores, that we adjourn. Christine?
This is on the motion to adjourn the work session. Councilor Beta?
Yes.
Councilor Graham?
Yes.
Councilor Bencomo?
Yes.
Councilor Coran?
Yes.
Councilor Flores?
Yes.
Councilor Gandara?
Yes.
Mayor?
Yes. Okay, we're adjourned. It's 4:26 p.m. All right, thank you. And whenever you're ready for the agenda setting. Okay, this is the agenda setting meeting for our March 7th, 2022. Chief, can you hold on before you leave, please? I just want to talk with you and EFO and, all right, number one.
Nice try.
Number 1, consent.
1 consent.
2, non-consent.
2 non-consent.
3, non-consent.
3 non-consent.
4, non-consent.
4 non-consent.
And 5, non-consent.
5 non-consent.